I think that's the least of our worries. I think we have to know if we're even good at this first.
I think it's apparent
Oh,
already.
we're 3 minutes in. We're fucking crushing. That's a really good topic, which is what happens to the way you listen to music when you work on music for a living.
Yeah.
And how does it change
Yeah.
how you engage with new music? You know, what does New Music Friday mean to me versus what it means to you? And for me, it's like, here are your competitors. And for you, it's like, here are some dope new tracks or not. You know, but it's I hear it differently, and I listen with a different kind of lens on a typical weekday. You know, sometimes I can listen late at night with my wife when we're having a glass of wine, but typically I'm listening in the studio to hear what other people are doing, to get a sense of the moment.
You're saying competitors. I feel like when I'm listening, that's the first instinct, and I quickly try to shift it to they're my peers and I'm rooting for them as well.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in a sense, it's both, because most of the time I hear a new song that Michael sends me and I say, damn, I wish I mixed that one. Like, I'm always hearing something to change about it. And that's my problem with being a music fan, is I can't be a fan of something that I want to constantly put my fingers on, my ears on, and change it. When I jump back in time, decades, I can't, there's nothing I can do about it.
There's no entry point.
Yeah.
We
talk about that. Spider and I talk about that because he'll send me a song and be like, I wish we could record that at the gift shop. Like, I feel that too, but there's nothing about that version that we could change. It would be another whole perspective on that song. So I actually want to come back to being a fan of new music. Brockhampton does that for me. When I listen to Brockhampton, though I wish I mixed it, every time I hear it, there's nothing about it that I'd want to hear any other way specifically, so I get to be a fan. So that's my problem with kind of fandom for music right now, is I constantly want to change.
I like that. I heard you talking to Matt about that the other day, and I thought it was powerful. For me, I'm not listening to competitors thinking, oh, what are, you know, it's not in that sort, that sounds negative when you say competitor, but I am listening to sort of what's the high watermark right now. But what I do find is that, you know, occasionally you're listening in that mode, and then something like Phoebe Bridgers comes along, and it just like sort of like whatever you were thinking about goes away, and you start feeling, and you're like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is music. This is why I do this. That the music sort of just affects you directly. And
I mean, most of the time when you have notes in your head, it's because the material or the performance just isn't there.
Isn't
and you're
compelling.
like, can I do something?
Right.
Yeah.
But when that stuff is there, like, the emphasis on the mix is less.
Yeah, well, I was talking to a young engineer about that recently. It's like all of us fell in love with music, not with sound, but with music on shitty systems. For me, it was a cassette stereo and a mono record player in my friend's house. I fell, like, listening to Mercury Rev on that mono record player, like, I can recall it.
Right.
Like, I can see the room. I can remember the feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it was just like, what the fuck
magic.
is happening?
It's
Or My
magic.
Bloody Valentine, right?
Yeah.
I fell in love with music in that context. You don't need giant PMCs to fall in love with music. Sound and working with it is a different thing. Obviously, we love good sound, but it is separate from good music.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, in fact, a lot of the time for me, as much as I love PMCs, and as this conversation goes on, I'm sure they'll be dropped a fair amount of times because I've been using them for so long, but they make it difficult sometimes to detach yourself from the technical aspect of a song, because I constantly feel like I hear better. I'm like, oh, I could make that move different because I hear it. And sometimes I know the monitoring situation that a record was made in, and I'm specifically thinking, oh, if that wasn't made at that studio, this could be better, right? So it's a very objective feeling for me of this could be improved. It could be stemmed out exactly where it was now, and it can be improved because I can hear very subtle moves that can enhance this. So it actually makes it harder to want to be a fan of music on something like that versus a Sonos rig or my AirPods on the bike and riding around. So
it's also a matter, I mean, you know, I've got playlists I can sit on PMCs and just
Ooh.
It's so when the music is done well, the engineering is done well, all of that just disappears
away.
You know what I mean?
We see that when we tune rooms, when we do acoustics work or set up speakers. There's, quite often when we get in a room first, it's like eyebrow raisingly bad. We're kind of looking at each other, going, "This is fucked up."
What are we gonna do
and
here?
Yeah, and you're trying to be cool, and you work through the moves, and you move the speakers, and you tune the speakers, and you add the treatment, whatever you're doing. And there's this moment, this transition that happens where we start talking about the songs and not the 4K problem or the boomy, kick drum.
Yeah.
When we're like, "Holy fuck, I love that track," or shit, I can't, like the other day with
you start connecting.
That's
to
what
the
you're
music
looking
and
for.
the intention.
I came up on Pavement and we're telling Pavement stories and whatever.
Yeah.
That's when that things are taking shape.
Yeah.
Because you stop hearing the speakers in the room, you start hearing the record.
You start feeling the record.
Yeah, feeling the record, not even hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is I think it applies to how I look at design as well. Like people see a design, Spider always sends me design work. He's so enthused by it. And immediately I'm like, okay, what font is that? Like, oh, the contrast is really cool. Oh, I see the grid.
Right.
I'm like immediately technical. Or there's moments where it hits me and I'm just emotional. And I think with music, even though I create music, I try to space out the amount of time between records because I only want it to be emotional, both from a creation point and a observational point of view. Like I want to listen to artists like Phoebe Bridgers where I know I'll connect to the emotion immediately and it won't be, and I won't have developed the technical prowess to sit there and nitpick anything. And so I think you guys are all paid to do it. The same way I'm paid to design, and therefore my technical prowess needs to continually increase, and I need to be continually more observational and technical and figuring out processes and all of that, even competitors, right? I'm so aware of it. Like I couldn't name 10 competitors of an artist, right? I'm like, I love this artist and that's all I know.
So
and
beautiful.
I know this record. Yeah. And so I think that's why like I'll get so excited about an artist. I don't know their team. I don't know that you went out to drinks with them. I know nothing.
Yeah.
I just know that this record makes me feel sad or happy or like I want to go to this country or city or, and that's it. And, it's great, the relationship that you have with design, because I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember when I didn't know anything about design, like nothing. And I was just like, what a cool design. And that was it.
Well, well on that note, if someone asks you or gives you a reference point, and they're like, oh, I want something to evoke this emotion or look, or even more basic is look like
a Blue Note cover.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You need to know how to do it, right? So you
Yeah.
have to continuously analyze that, right?
Yeah.
If someone were to say, hey, I want that bass tone from that Robin record, I have to know how to get that that Robin bass tone. I have to know if I can do it on my end, or if I have to ask the producer. Like when the artist is asking for something, I have to say, that's not really on my end. It's not really an EQ thing. Let's go back to the production, and it's the wrong synth, right? I have to know that. So you have to be thinking that way inherently, which is the blessing and curse of all of this. Because you want to be a fan, but I'm also constantly thinking, oh, how is that done?
That is a topic
The
right there.
the blessing and curse.
That is such a topic.
Yeah.
I get that in mastering. People are like, they give me a MIDI production. They're like, yeah, we're looking for it to sound like kind of a 50s, in the room thing. And, so if you could just, do that in mastering, it's like, no, bro, that's not, sorry, this is not like, this is not where we make that sound.
No, it happened to me today.
Yeah, I can't,
today.
I want to help you, but I can't do that right now. I was thinking about today about this thing of music. When was the last time you heard a sound on a record that you had no idea how it was made? Like, how often does that happen?
Very rarely, but just happened with an OG Volta record.
Oh,
Right?
dope.
Yeah, I mean, they're so fucking good. So I even asked them what it was because it sounded like an E-bowed cello. It was a synthesizer, but it's not sample-based. It was a synth. It was wavetable or something. It was a synth.
Nice.
But it sounded like an E-bowed cello. And I was like, who E-bowed a cello? That doesn't happen. They blow my mind with that. They have a way of having an organic feel to a synthesizer in every sound. So that's the last time, and I can't think of a time before it.
Well,
except for their recent tracks that I
the
mixed.
short list of pop producers with jazz background is probably a short list, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
there's some deep, there's some deep.
I would say in hip hop that changes a little bit, but in pop territory, sure.
I'd say the main hook sample from Fast Talk is pretty hard to understand where that came from.
But we know what that is, so we can talk about that.
I don't remember.
It's a Prophet 6 into a Fender
tape echo
thing. Yeah.
So
and it sounds like a flute.
It sounds like a
pitched
flute with a
down.
trumpet in it in the same sample.
It's mysterious.
Yeah.
I think this double-edged sword thing, this sort of blessing and curse thing about working on music is, yes, you develop this you deepen your connection. What I'm concerned about is how stress affects your association to music and how it can make you cynical and jaded, and what it means to protect your childlike connection and enthusiasm to music, and how lifestyle impacts that. And it's something I've lived, and it's not something I've articulated. I think that's a really interesting thing, how stress can ruin your love of music.
Well, that argument makes me think of saying no more than yes, right? So if you're going to get emotionally involved in a record or a single piece of music, whatever it's going to be, you want to remember, even in those stressful period of time, that you said yes to this because of this connection that you had. It happens all the time to me. Recently, I've been working on way more gigs that I like than don't like. So it's a kind of fresh topic for me to even think about. I always think that if I'm in the 80-20 position of 80%, excited and enthusiastic for, and 20% kind of for the money or support the team or whatever that has to be for, that's a good place. I think I'm even higher than that right now. I think about 90, 10, 95, 5.
Amazing. Look, in mixed life, you are, in our experience, we've all worked on things that we didn't connect with, and you make an effort to find that thing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more about like the general tone of your life, financial difficulty, which we know is sort of a common aspect of trying to make a career in audio engineering specifically. And most people try to pursue this because they have some core love. They have a core love of music and the ability to sort of touch it and change it and make it better. And developing that sense of mastery. So what if you're not getting better, right? And you're not making money and you're stressed the fuck out and you're not working on music you love? How long can you do that before you're just no longer motivated to get better?
How would you measure that though? Because that seems likely. That seems
you have
likely.
to take stock. I mean, any creative pursuit, you're just taking stock all the time, reflecting, being aware of your mental state, and like how long should you be in a negative mental state during the act of your work?
And the worry is the sort of coping mechanisms that you develop.
Sure.
So
which you can't predict and recognize. Like,
in my world, in mastering, say when I came up, I came up in Ireland, in a small town, in a small county, in a small country, right? So I was very peripheral. Was
the house small too?
The house I lived in was small, but say during my work life, I've been recording, mixing, mastering, playing for 25 years, whatever. But until I moved to LA, I was in a very, I was one of the only recording engineers in my whole county, right? So you work on what you get, right? And there's some amazing music there, and there's a lot of rough edges. And a young rock band in my hometown that wants to sound like Blink-182, they're not getting all the way to sounding like Blink-182. A young rock band that makes it to LA, that has sort of graduated from Philly or wherever, and makes it to LA and can pay rent and can sustain here for a couple of years and gets in a decent room with a producer, they're going to sound more like Blink-182, right? So if there's some kind of way of benchmarking this, which clearly there isn't, but if you could imagine that. So I'm working on these records, and you develop coping mechanisms sonically. You develop tricks to sort of unfuck stuff that's wrong, and that becomes habitual, and it's very dangerous. So, interesting. I was thinking about coming over here, thinking about mentors. I had watched some of the Tony conversation on Instagram today, and I was just thinking about mentoring and thinking about Dave Collins for me, and being in the room with him. I had an online run-in with someone the other day who sort of accused me of being full of my own self-importance, and my comeback, which he didn't buy, but my comeback was, I don't even have to leave the room I work in. Like, I don't have to leave the single room I work in to find someone with more experience, better ears, and better technical chops. Like, I'm well aware of my rank in the world, but thinking about that sort of mentoring thing and how, someone like Dave never said, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do multi-band upward parallel expansion.
Yeah, right.
But he's just dealing with records. I watch the raw material and I see him using an EQ and a limiter. And it's like, well, that didn't sound good before, and now it sounds good. And he's modeling this kind of simple, and he's gone down all the rabbit holes. He's tried all of the complicated
minimum
techniques.
effective dose thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you can definitely make things sound different. And when you're dealing with really scrappy demos, you can make things sound better with these complicated techniques. But then you build up the habit of using them, and they don't serve. They don't serve good records.
Well, that goes to the whole notion of when you're a young engineer and you're inexperienced, you're probably not working with great artists.
Yes.
So you're never in a situation where you actually do the job of recognizing a magical moment and getting out of the way. Right. So the only way to do that, have access to that when you're young, is to work with someone who is successful in this sort of mentoring thing.
And that's
which is the thing we're missing.
What I didn't have.
Yeah, exactly.
There was there was a couple of good recording engineers in the whole country, and they weren't in my hometown. So you're just making your own mistakes.
Yeah.
I talk about that on that interview with Tony, because I don't necessarily, I can't put all credit on any one person, but I know for a fact that I wouldn't be where I am in my career as fast as I am without him, right? So I can definitely put a marker on, well, this person vouched for me, so he must have seen something that I can now recognize that someone else can see, even if I can't see it in myself, because of my, like Spider is saying, my history of polishing turds and not really having that magical moment to really enhance too much. There's a few of those moments, but not as many that occur now, where that's my job, is to really, really embolden those magic moments and stay out of the way. So Tony vouching for me is that kind of a barometer, that pressure test of, okay, cool, I can remember that moment that someone believes in me, that you believed in me. And not everyone is as fortunate to have that, and I'm aware of that. So I think this conversation that we're embarking on is a way of allowing people kind of into our world and say, hey, you have to find that in some way. It can be from a specific mentor. It can be from us on a fringe saying, it's okay to not feel great about that thing that you tried yesterday, it didn't work, but don't think it was great just because you're trying to move on to the next day. Realize where it had its faults, and then keep trying, keep improving it, keep practicing, and keep redoing it. I was talking on Instagram with Matt Rad about this on yesterday's recording. Just practice, practice, practice. I mean, that's such a cliche, but thinking about the enthusiasm, like your childhood enthusiasm for music and fanship of bands, artists, anything that you're a fan of, design, writing style, author, anything, you keep doing it. You keep reading, you keep studying. And at some point, it's going to get overwhelming if you're not matching that thing that you're constantly looking up to. But that's impossible. You can't match anything. You have to find your own voice, right? And it's not until you get vouched for, I think, that you're able to recognize your own voice. And that can be from your fans when you're constantly putting out records and they're streaming less than 1,000 times, and all of a sudden you get that million. You're like, whoa, someone must have liked it. Actually, no, man, 1 million people liked it. There's a bunch of ways to get validated, and we're all craving validation. If you say you're not, that's cool. Good for you for, avoiding that look inside.
What's a simple way without having to get 1 million streams? Like,
well, I mean, the mentorship language. I mean, the mentorship is okay. So that's I never really thought about the conversation in terms of mentorship as a proxy for mentorship. So like I have thought about it in terms of a proxy for what a traditional record producer, like the role that a traditional record producer played in the community, where engineers would be learning from them and they would be protecting, sort of setting the conditions under which records are made and that sort of thing. So with that role not being filled by anyone so much anymore, like where does that perspective and protection and all that sort of thing come from? Right? So the idea of systematizing and broadcasting this conversation that we're already having is a way of sort of culturally having that effect on the community, where the way a producer would think about a situation, now the engineer, the young up-and-coming engineer is starting to think this way and is, so that information is sort of being passed down, down the generations.
A bit earlier.
Yeah. So it's like the next best thing to having a mentor is sort of listening in on a mentor having a conversation with somebody who's sort of in the same boat as you.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what this conversation means for the community.
We talked a couple of weeks ago about, I think it was you and I on the phone, we were talking about, watching older engineers work. And as a young engineer who wants to make a song and dance about everything you do, watching them take what you think are shortcuts. So, they're not fussing about the mic on the snare. You're like, shouldn't we put a whatever on the snare? And shouldn't we angle it at 45 degrees? Because I read on whatever. And they're like, no, it's good, man. It sounds good. And they're on to the next thing. And as a young engineer, I perceive that as kind of laziness or they're over it. They don't care.
Right.
They're past it, whatever.
Right.
And you imagine that your kind of like puppy dog enthusiasm for every detail is in some way better.
Yeah, you don't realize your persnickety. You think you're detailed. You don't realize you're getting in the way.
You're getting in the way, exactly. And that they're keeping things moving and they're solving problems when there are problems.
You don't recognize the priorities.
Completely.
Yeah.
And it takes a minute, or maybe you get slapped a couple of times by an older guy who says, listen, ease up, I know you want to make a mark here and you want to show you care, but there are other ways,
Well, you go into a room and you think you know something, and then you see someone like Tony do it a completely different way faster, way easier. The way you thought things were done, but didn't want to do because you wanted to find your own way of doing it, the most unique way of putting three mics on a snare drum. And you're like, wait, we only need one, right? We only need this minimal effective dose. And it's until you see someone else do it that you recognize that that's okay. And that's what Spider's getting at. And I really feel strongly about being a voice for it in the community, because it's really, you need to be put in check sometimes for your unique ideas. I mean, we're always striving for that memorable sound that Spider brought up, like that House's record. Like, what is that sound? What is that thing? A lot of the times it's not that tricky.
Well, the thing is, you can't write an issue of Tape Op, or you can't make an episode of Mix with the Masters if you don't sort of idolize this gear and these techniques. If the episode of Tape Op is just one page where it says, find great artists, get the fuck out the way, and capture what they're doing. Yeah. The end.
You can never write it again.
There's no magazine, and the ad for one piece of gear in the back, some DI box or whatever. But a radio. Okay, let's get one of those. But like, it doesn't.
DI box.
This sort of brings us to one of the sort of raison d'etres of the podcast, and the way that the thing that connects us, which is this sort of extraordinary love of music, right? But also this frustration at the tenor of the current conversation. No, this is a bad word. The tenor of sort of the dialogue in the world at large, right? So we're looking at good people we care about, young kids that we want to see succeed, gear manufacturers that we love, sort of focusing on the wrong things.
Yes.
Focusing on, features and specs and techniques and fussy stuff. Vintage emulation, there's so many roads you could go down, but this sort of impression of ego, this sort of like, I'm going to mix this record to perfection. It's like, no, somewhere there's an artist with something to say. You need to capture it. Sure, you can augment it, you can support it, you can dress it, but ultimately there's got to be an artist with something to say, and then you bring it across the line. But the idea of, you know, mixing or mastering sort of being the heart of the record, or the gear you used, or the console it was mixed on, you know what I mean? That's fundamentally wrong, I think. And when, you know, one of the things, you know, coming up in Ireland as a kid, you know, where you're just getting access to good gear, I had to buy it all and try it, and, you know, and you're looking for that snare sound on whatever record. I don't, you know, I can't even remember what I was searching for, but, you know, I want my snare to sound like Smashing Pumpkins, you know, and I need fucking Jimmy, right? If I don't have Jimmy and the way that he plays it, I'm not getting that sound, you know, and it's not about the pre, and it's not about the mic, and it's about a good drummer, right? When you have a good drummer in the room, do you want to come at him with a Radio Shack tape deck? Probably not. You know, you want a decent mic and a pre, good enough.
Yeah.
But that's something that I think we sort of bonded over, was this kind of this. That was a kick drum sound right there. But we sort of bonded over this shared vision of a better conversation, right? Not even a vision. I mean, we have this conversation. We're constantly sort of like, when we talk about gear, it's not like, hey, you should get this new thing, this fancy, you know, whatever plugin. It's like, hey, you should stop using these kinds of plugins. Try it without. You know, like your thing, you know, it's like, why are you compressing? You know, have you considered not compressing? It's like, which sounds like, have you considered not breathing? To most young kids, they're like, well, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
no, I know.
I can't not compress. Pros compress, bro. You know, and it's like, well, some pros do, you know?
But it's back to that asking better questions. The question isn't what compressor did you use? It's why did you do it? Because especially with plugins these days, they're all doing the same thing most of the time. I mean, you can get the desired result with anything built into any DAW. You don't need the special GUI 1176. It's just, you don't need it. And if we need to prove that in some way, you can ask any engineer at the highest level what they used on something, and a lot of them will...
I've seen it. I've seen Spike Stent mix a record, stock Logic Pro.
Yeah, stock Logic, exactly. Like, this is...
by telling me what to do.
Right.
He didn't even touch shit.
Right, exactly.
He just, you know what I mean? He knew every fucking plugin that was in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's misinformation, it's driving towards the wrong goals or the wrong way towards the goal. We all fall in love with the process of what it means to make art, and our contribution to that art feels like enough for me, and I think it's a lot of us.
But that contribution could be positive, active, or passive, right? So that's the approach with which engineers approach their work can sort of be this additive sort of approach. How am I going to color these sounds? What am I going to contribute to this?
Yeah.
How do I inject my point of view, even like from an ego perspective, which can be cool. Like a Black Keys record sounds the way it does because somebody added some shit to the signal, and that's, you know, that's a thing, right? There is value there, but you can also approach audio engineering in a more passive way, where you're trying to, again, clear the pathway from that moment of inspiration to the audience's ear. And if you're not thinking that way, you're not going to recognize that it is being diminished by the move that is made. Like, you're not even paying attention.
Oh, this is such a big
to know
topic.
what the gear is adding. And that's what I mean, I was with two top mixers today, right? Setting up some mix bus gear, the Fern stuff. And all the texts are about what the gear's not doing. All the follow-up texts are like, oh, okay. It's like a switch in mindset.
Yes.
There's something there to be teased out. And I think there's some objective stuff.
Well,
some measure, like some spec that we don't have yet, or some sort of... George Hazelrig from DW Fern and I talked about this a lot. It's like, is there some spec that can reflect our collective taste in gear, like the core stuff that we like? The AEA ribbons and the DW Fern tube pre's and the, you know, like the Lynx converters and the PMCs and, all of that gear, the Grace monitor controller, all of it sort of does very little.
Yeah,
It preserves the integrity of the source. And so is there a useful spec that sort of takes multiple factors, like a score, some scoring system?
For a piece of equipment? You mean that?
Well, yeah, like if it's distortion values of different types, all sort of added together.
measurable.
There has to be some objective
Well, yeah.
thing behind what we all recognize collectively.
That's my, go.
It
Mike.
has me thinking about qualitative versus quantitative data and the pros and cons of that. In a way, having the gear do less, or having the gear add less, that's more of a philosophical thing. And I think there's so much qualitative data there that should be explored, which is the gear and the lifestyle are directly connected. And it's like you're adopting a philosophy of minimalism in the work that you're doing, or minimalism, which is a kind
That's
of buzzword,
the philosophy of those gear designers. I
Right.
mean, that's what Doug
Yeah.
was trying to
And so it's
do.
like it's ironic of the idea of looking for data to add to represent the qualitative data of the fact that you're removing things, and it's like it's so natural for us to want more numbers or want more data when it's like, are you living better with this gear? And I think that's
Well, yeah.
Or are you getting to your end goal faster with less
ultimately,
stress?
yeah. And so where we started was talking about stress, its relationship to enthusiasm with the work. And if the products that you're buying make you less stressed because your clients are like, thank you, this is great, first pass, then like, it's not, that's the data right there. Are you happy? And is your client happy?
How is your gear affecting your blood pressure?
Yeah.
No.
How
I'm
is the
saying
gear
we link it
affecting
into
your cortisol levels?
We hook it into the health app and correlate some
There you go.
specs in the gear to health outcomes.
You watch the numbers dive when
Well,
you
you
get
have an
that
app-
new pre.
Yeah.
It's like a box of Cheerios.
No,
It's
you have
like
your
affects
Apple
good
Watch
heart
on and it
health.
vibrates and it reads your blood pressure and you're
We're gonna redirect, instead of using big data to cure cancer, we're gonna use it to pick better mic pre's. We've got we've got some real problems.
we
What could go
Priorities.
wrong?
No.
What
Okay,
could
so-
go wrong?
There are priorities.
Something that you mentioned, and this is probably a footnote so that we can come back to it as a topic, but something you mentioned, which is something that I see quite a bit. I still interact on forums. I still actually look at gear slots. I find it useful. Like I find looking at
Good for
Reddit,
you, man.
Wow,
Yeah.
really?
No, I do.
I didn't know this about
I
you.
do. I think it's important. I find it enjoyable and important to be connected to those conversations.
No, that's part
know.
of the value that you bring to the conversation
It's-
is your insights
yeah.
into this world.
So
Because
you can-
I have never been in there.
Yeah, same.
And
Yeah.
well, I've
been
being
in
that
there,
kid on
but-
the island that I described, I didn't have any other way to get information. There was no getting Tony on the blower. You know what I
Right,
mean? It
right.
wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So I needed that information, and of course, a lot of it was bad info. Right. But what's interesting is we're talking about. There's this moment that happens, and it happens at a different point for different artists or different engineers, rather, where you are presented with something profound and you realize that it's happening in the room and you have nothing to do with it. So there's good singers, nice songs, your mic, your $1,000 tube mic or whatever, and you're recording. And then there's a moment that happens either live or in the studio, this moment where someone does something profound in front of you, where it's just like, where all you can do is just sit down and watch, right? And we use the same words to describe the act of capturing these things. So for example, as something that comes to mind is when I get on Gear Slots and want to talk about mastering, there's a lot of EDM producers who talk about mastering. They're like, yeah, bro, I master with 17 plugins. And, and what they're describing is not really mastering in the same sense as I.
It's like it's master bus processing.
I'm getting, it's part of the sonic, it's part of the creation process, right?
Yes.
Without those mastering plugins in air quotes, their sound goes away. It's a different record. It's actually part of the core creation. Whereas for me, someone else has made the record, produced it, someone has mixed it, and I'm very much sort of trying to preserve everything that's good and make the little moves that need to be made, right? So it's a very different, the idea of putting a multi-band compressor across every mix and having it punch 6 dB on the bottom. Like
templates don't
no,
work here.
No, it's a very different world. But if you ask that guy, what are you doing? He's like, I'm mastering, bro. And what am I doing? I'm mastering. It's like,
because if he searches mastering, he gets the information he's looking for.
Yes, but we're using one word, and the same as with engineering. There are people.
It's concept creep.
The idea of Noah having a conversation with, you mentioned Black Keys. It's like
Noah Snyder.
Yeah. So Noah is recording orchestras in some of the great stages, right?
Yeah.
He's capturing incredible players, some of the best players, with the best gear, with the best, team. Best team. Danny Elfman composing, everything is at that level.
Yeah.
He's very, very, very much trying to transcribe a moment to capture something that's happening in the room. And when you get to stand in those rooms, it is
breathtaking.
It is profound. It's this thing we talked about.
Right.
Whereas with a Black Keys record, I'm just assuming, I've never worked on any of those records, but there's someone playing a janky guitar with a kind of a funky riff, and then they're like diming it through some stuff until they get a texture or a color or a sound, and then maybe Chad Blake is taking it another level again with his processing. And it's not the same gig, but we sort of
Tame Impala is not. It's a whole other thing.
And we lump it all into engineers. So Noah's an engineer and Chad Blake is an engineer, but their methodologies are very different, right?
Yeah.
And
the foundational approach is opposite.
It is. It's capturing instead of sort of creating. This you said additive or
I don't really know.
There's a way of thinking about that, but I think that's a good topic to explore, because I think if we're having conversations about mastering, and I'm talking about my kind of mastering, and you're talking about EDM, we're not going to get very far.
Right.
Like the tool set, the approach, the mindset, none of it really makes any sense. So we need better. And I've argued a lot on Gear Sluts that I think the kind of people doing their own stuff on their bus is processing. It's not mastering.
Yeah.
Like if you're not someone new listening to someone else's work, I think that objectivity is like a core.
Yes.
It is a defining principle of mastering.
Yeah.
But most people don't agree with me.
Right.
Well, I want to jump back to something you were talking about preserving, right? So you're sitting there at the end of the chain and you're preserving the magic and making small moves. I feel like along the line, from start to finish, from inception to completion, we're preserving, right? So the engineer is there from start to finish, whether it's the same engineer or, 3 in the process, from recording, mixing, mastering. There's a recording engineer that is preserving the space in order to get the magic and that profound moment to happen, right? So you're saying the engineer's sitting there and they're witnessing this profound moment that they have nothing to do with. They have something to do with it, because if they've done their job correctly, they've gotten all the technical boundaries out of the way. And opened up a safe space, creative space for the artist to move us and to capture it without Pro Tools or tape machines stopping, whatever that technology entails. Then the producer messes around with it, engineer comes back, does some editing. We're always preserving that magical moment, or at least that should be what we're doing, right? There's a very little argument against wanting to preserve every magical moment. We can stray away from that and do a save as and fuck shit up for a bit, but we always have that way, and we should have that foresight as producers and engineers to get back to that magical moment and never. And that goes back to Spider's, that childhood enthusiasm for music. Like, what actually instigated that first feeling, that first connection to what was created that everyone in the room felt, right? It was inarguable that the moment was felt. That happens so many times in a writing room, and engineers are notorious for ruining that later when the artist and the producer go out for coffee and the engineer is messing around. I mean, I've done it. I'm guilty of doing this. Where I'm messing with something and they come back and like, wait, what happened? Like, oh, I cleaned it up.
I fixed it.
I fixed it.
Yeah.
And we're like, wait, the vibe's gone. What happened to all that noise? Oh, I gated it. Why did you gate out why did you,
So,
please jump in.
So
But
there's a kid in Frankfurt who's going to get to hear this conversation, right? And he's or she has never seen this profound moment, and they're listening to records being moved, and then they're getting in the studio with who they get to get in the studio with, and they're not experiencing these moments. There's nothing where they're like, holy fuck, the clouds just parted. I need to get out the way, right? So what we're saying to those kids is, or adults or whoever you are, go and find that.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think I'm saying that. What I'm saying is develop the skills and the openness emotionally so you don't miss it when it comes. You can't look for it. You can't create that moment.
No, you have to. I mean, you have to.
Oh, you can
seek out
but
great
you can.
artists.
I mean, if you're in
Sure.
If you're in my hometown, they're rarer than they are in LA.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. I take that back.
Being in the room with those people is the job.
Yeah. Right. But everyone has a different taste. There's no objective greatness. So
Sure.
you could have bad taste, think that you're with the best artist in your city, your state, your town, your coast, wherever you are, and it's just not that good, right? But you're still practicing, you're still involved in the process enough so the next time that were to happen, you don't mess it up. So to say you're constantly to seek out those great artists is not fully the job. It's part of the job, of course, because that edges up your chances towards success. But you still have to be great.
I mean, you could define it as success for yourself. Like, the quality of the artists you work with is like the quality of your experience and the quality of your work. Like, you can only sound as good as the artist, right? I don't know how you think about your own career development without that, right? Is it the only job you're doing? Of course not. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, and more things to think about and strategize about. But I think young engineers aren't deliberate about it enough. They don't know that these, likes to compare it to whale watching because it's this sort of ineffable thing. Like, you don't know when it's going to come, and when it does, it's like really breathtaking. But if you're not looking for it, if you don't know it's there, then you are going to gate the noise out and you're going to spoil it, So it's a fundamental aspect. It's what you're doing when you hit record. You're hoping for it to happen.
I know.
And if you don't know that it's a thing, then...
But that's, I think we're saying the same thing, because the
Yeah.
whale watching metaphor is exactly what I was kind of getting at. Is always be aware that can happen. So always put your best foot forward and get everything else out of the way so that can happen. You're right, though. You might have to do some work to seek out these artists, but sometimes that artist just plops in front of you in the room. And if you're not practiced enough and you haven't fell in love with your process enough, then you're not going to capture that moment. And that's when Pro Tools is going to stop. That's when that's going to happen. So I think there's two parts to that is all I guess I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
You
like,
need to be looking for that big blue whale. Like, you need to be out there looking for it, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, it's respect for the artist. It's like, if you don't work with great artists, you're not going to have a ton of respect, right? If you respect creativity and what artists bring, then you're going to orient yourself toward protecting that moment of inspiration so that other people can share in the feeling.
Yeah.
And so, like, the producer is going to create a sort of tunnel between that moment of inspiration and the audience on a relational level. It's going to pick the people and the place and create this atmosphere and deal with the shit in the background so people don't have to. And then the engineer maintains that tunnel on a technical level. And if you look at it from that perspective, supreme respect for artistry and for inspiration and whatever magic that represents in our lives and what it means for the enrichment of society in perpetuity. If you look at it that way, then you will be more vigilant about protecting it.
Yeah.
And you will think about, your idea about what to add to the sound is then properly contextualized.
Yes.
Right? With that orientation of protection.
It's interesting how uncomfortable it is. Like, I believe what you're saying 100%. Like, with every fiber of my being. I've lived it. I know where I went wrong. And yet it's still weird to sort of put forward this and say to kids, it's kind of not in your hands. It's in your hands, as John is saying, because you need to hone your skills and you need to get your gear in order and make sure Pro Tools isn't going to crash like we were trying to do tonight. You want to get everything right, but ultimately the whale shows up when the whale shows up. And what do we want to do to maximize our chances? We want to get to a place where there are more performers. If we find a producer who tends to work with great artists, we want to keep that gig,
build relationships.
But ultimately, it's hard to conceive of a career where you're kind of not really in control of when the magic shows up, and that's what I think that's fundamental. So we've, George Hazelrig from D.W. Farn, one of the Hazelrig brothers, came up with this phrase, the Mixdown industrial complex, and I heard it from you, and I don't know what I thought it meant, but in my mind, I sort of made it into this representation of the modern problem, which is this kind of focus on gear, this focus on end results, this sort of producer or engineer as star, as makers of sounds, and kind of everything that's wrong with modern record making. And there's a lot right with modern record making. I'm not some sort of, I'm not, super obsessed with vintage stuff. There's a lot right with the way we get to make records now. But I think that sort of idea of the Mixdown industrial complex, it's hard to advocate against that and say, hey, build your chops, find your people, build a crew of people you trust, people who will call you and say, you really should have not done that to the snare, or you should have backed off your busking, whatever. Friends, people you trust. But ultimately to say that, hey, these great records that you might get to make, you're not really in control of when they show up. You just have to keep batting. You have to keep getting up and doing it every day. And sometimes, you get a talk and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just a good record, or it's actually a great record that doesn't really connect with an audience at the wrong time. Or, you look at Paul's Boutique, Beastie Boys, right? I love that record. It was panned critically at the time when it came out. And now it's seen as genius,
it's
right?
It's a cult.
It's a cult record, yeah.
Love that record.
Yeah. So, you had some thoughts.
I did. I've been taking a lot of notes.
Looks like the Unabomber's fucking manifesto or something.
Oh, man.
It's crazy.
Too soon.
He made it on a typewriter, bro.
Yeah, I didn't bring my typewriter today. I was thinking about going back a few conversations from where we are now. I was thinking about the narrative in the industry and how the narrative from gear manufacturers marketing gear is to be incentivized. They're incentivized by engineers wanting to be engineers. And so the narratives they're projecting are ones of technical specifics and engineering boner things. You know what I mean? And really the role, what we're saying here and what I believe as a designer, as a creative person, is if we're saying to get out of the way of the message, right? And allow the audience to decode it and decode the emotion and whatever you wanted to encode in it. The message is being communicated by the industry because they want you to buy products or be an engineer, be great at it. And I think the difference here, what I've always loved about these conversations is, what is the point of buying this pair of speakers or microphone or whatever? And it is to produce art, and no one's telling people to get out of the way or how to do it. Because it's not just saying it and then all of a sudden you're out of the way. There's meditation involved. There's introspection involved. There's health related things involved. There's, any issues you have unresolved with a family member.
Because we're talking about emotions.
Yeah.
We're talking about a physical response to stimuli.
There's very little time on that. There's very little time in my day that I spend thinking about the gear that I own.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't wake up and go, I can't wait to use those tubes.
Right.
I love all my tube gear, right? I do. We talk about it every now and then, but we're done with talking about that.
Yeah.
So when I get a question about my gear, it's reasonable to imagine when one asks me that question, I'm going to squirm in my seat before I come up with a response.
It's because it's touching a superficial layer.
Yes.
The box itself is a collection of atoms. What it does, like what it provides to you in terms of experience and how it handles the signal, its functionality is the thing you focus on.
Yes.
Its effect, its impact. And so to sort of talk on the gear itself is like to miss the point.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that what
I also wanted to add another part to this.
Yeah, please.
So this guy, Earl Nightingale, excellent last name. He said that luck equals preparedness and opportunity. And so I think oftentimes, especially from a consumer narrative point of view, they're really focused on the preparedness and only a fraction of it, which is if you have gear, you're prepared to do work.
Yeah, you're legit.
They're not saying, right. And I think people...
You're a real engineer.
Right,
Seemingly.
right.
You're being very kind to these manufacturers. I'll come back with...
It's career essentialism.
I'm with you.
Right, but if you're looking at this equation, which I do believe to be true, right, you have to be prepared. An opportunity has to present itself for then you to be what people deem as lucky, right?
Right.
But the focus on how you prepare is, I think, a conversation that we've had and we continue to evolve. And it rarely ever involves gear. And when it does, it's not really about the number of tubes or what board or it
is in my
rarely
world.
involves,
I think I got just shy of 100 at this point.
well, sure, that's
It's a big room to
something to be
heat
proud
up in
of.
the winter.
Yeah. I was warming my hands on them the other day. It was kind of cool. I think it's important for people to note that there's a lot of ways to be prepared, and focusing on the one that you spend money on is not the only way. And in fact, there's free ways, or there's ways that cost $0 that might take more of your time that actually benefit you and actually make you prepared. And then in terms of the other half of this luck equation, which is opportunity, you can't find by just like, I mean, you technically could find the next Beyonce, right? But like if that's your only goal in terms of seeking opportunity, is like it's Beyonce or it's nothing else. You know, it's like the next giant thing or nothing else, then your orientation of what opportunity means is wrong, right? And so thinking about what are the levels of opportunity that you might have access to now, which I believe is really any of them, right? As long as you're in the right rooms with the right people, or introducing yourself and trying to develop relations with the right people. It might not happen immediately, but over time that relationship could evolve. And so you have to be prepared mentally, physically, and technically, but also be working on what does it mean to seek out opportunity.
Increase.
Are you uncomfortable
possible.
with it?
Well,
You know?
I have a couple of thoughts on that, because two words come to mind with the last few things that were brought up, and which are believability and transparency. So when you're talking about the artist that you want to be in the room with, the artist that you're the whale, how do you recognize the whale? Well, the whale is someone that when you record, when you capture that moment, you believe them. And you believe that everyone, or a lot of people, will also believe them and feel something and share that feeling that you felt in that moment. Because no one can know the success that an artist will have. And if you think you do, you're wrong, unless maybe you're Max Martin and you've seen it so many times. Just there's a ratio of success there that you can at least bet some of your money on that there's going to be success because you found them, right? Sure. There's probably a few of those people out there. And then there's transparency, which is back to the gear. We like gear that is transparent and brings this sense of clarity, and is not very additive. It's very passive, and it emboldens the right things that we're looking for tonally and fundamentally, harmonically, but it gets out of the way and lets you perceive the things that are wrong with things sonically and arrangement-wise that you can then, bring even more clarity to. So these two things should be on the mind constantly, right? Are we are we buying gear?
Or you should be tuned into those dimensions.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not consciously, intuitively.
Yeah. It's intuitively.
Yeah.
It's getting out of the way of yourself so you can be
Yeah.
intuitively
Exactly.
connected with
Well, they
that.
should be on the mind until you're
Until they're
intuitively
intuitive.
doing
Yeah,
it.
they're practiced
And
to a
you're
degree.
unconsciously competent.
Because up until even this moment in the conversation, a lot of people might not even have thought that's something to be aware of to begin with. So you have to become aware of it, keep it in the forefront of your mind to a degree, and then let that dissipate and get out of the way. But thinking about the gear with those two words in mind, when someone is selling you a piece of gear, how believable are they? Right. And maybe that's the way you get involved in the first demo. Maybe it's your first set of speakers and the sales guy is so believable. Like, this will change your game. Okay, cool. That's great. But have you taken a step back after that high energy enthusiasm was put into your studio? Whether it felt like selling or not is not even the point. Like, judge it for yourself, right? So the Mixdown industrial complex and that concept is really, really, I want to say it's misinterpreted by a lot of people because that is their incentive. Their incentive is to get us engineers to buy gear, right? So we can't fault them for it, but it's our job to distill down all of the information we're getting from all these sources. And I want to take a moment to say that I want to take responsibility here. Like, I want to combine our scouring of the internet and our Gear Sluts member over here, Rory.
15 years, bro.
I'm not on it, but
how
when
many
I do,
badges do you have?
when I stumble across it when searching for a Pro Tools error and it comes up, I'm like, this is noise. It's only noise.
Mostly.
It's mostly noise. I'm going to go with it's only noise just because that's going to be my stance on this.
Yeah.
It's nice that we have a representative, but when thinking about luck, opportunity, believability, and these preparedness, transparency is like, if the more transparent you are, the closer to preparedness and transparent you can get, right? So you're going to come off as you are, and then someone can decide if they want to fuck with you or not, right? So it could be an artist, it could be a co-producer, it could be the team building that Rory was getting to. If you're not transparent, that's not going to last that long.
The
right?
trust isn't going to be established.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a key value in successful people that at least I come across in this industry is they've developed trust with a very core small group of people, right? If you want to get into that, it's very difficult. You might as well start your own.
Yes.
If you somehow along that journey become part of a crew that is making 100+ hit songs a year, all power to you. But that's not the likelihood of the outcome. So you might as well become prepared to any other table.
I mean, there's like 4 full episodes just from from your notes, right?
Yeah.
So on the gear manufacturers, like when I said I think you're being too kind. So here's what I mean when I say that. I think that let's imagine 2 situations. One is where you get a very well-intentioned, very nice group of lawyers who get together on the weekend and have a jam band. And they are nice guys and they write songs and they're fairly mediocre and they have nice instruments and they jam in a band room and you get to record them. Now, let's imagine 2 scenarios. One where you have a super simple, I'm aging myself, but like a Mackie and a simple recording rig, no Mojo gear, right? And you record them, or versus Neve console, tape machine, all the goodies, right? Is the jam band going to sound more real, more authentic, more like the classic records with the fancy gear, the big room, all of that? Yes. Is it going to stand the test of time, be an important record? No. Let's flip to Zeppelin. Zeppelin, you record them with the Mackie board and the Pro Tools Digio one, again, aging myself, whatever. Shitty gear, basic gear. You capture them, or you capture them, great room, Neve console, tape machine, right? Zeppelin on a dictaphone, on an iPhone mic, on a stereo, straight to stereo. They're great. My point is that the mojo that the gear companies are selling us, they're saying that if you have these pre's and this tape emulation software, that your records are going to have mojo, have this vibe, have this authenticity, and they won't. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
If the song,
Well, it's not one-to-one. It can help, like you're saying. It does
helps.
enhance when you have
Right.
found that artist,
Yes.
that magic, that band, that art,
yeah, it's definitely part of the records that we love.
Right.
If you
Yeah.
listen to an old Stones record and you try and separate what the Helios console and the tape machine was bringing to that, it's a part of it, no question. But the Stones were still compelling if
Yeah.
you're a Stones fan.
But this is sort of the consumerist problem, right? It's like if all the engineers are spending, let's say the pro audio community is spending a considerable amount of their time talking about gear, thinking about gear,
Yes.
considering gear, flipping gear, evaluating,
Idolizing,
like
yeah.
all the time that is spent, right?
This is good. This is really good.
And the conversation around NAMM and AES is one about gear.
Yes.
And what is motivating this conversation, right? We know there's a lot of signaling taking place about,
Yes.
I got this console because I wanted to be taken seriously, or whatever the version of that is, right? Consumerism, that is what we're talking about when we talk about the Mixdown industrial complex. It's this sort of consumerist, malignant.
There's a cynicism to it, I think. On the
At least
on
it
the
leads
side of
to
the
it.
the side of the companies. I think they're making promises that they can't keep.
That's the ethical problem
they
that
don't-
I have.
Yeah, but they don't need to keep the promises. Why?
Because nobody knows.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is we get back to these sort of foundational moments. I remember specific instances where I saw extraordinary things happen. Right in front of me, things that I couldn't explain. A lot of them were around this TV show that I worked on for years called Other Voices, where I was, what was my title? Stage manager, technically, kind of a production manager for the venue. And we would record in this 150-year-old church in this tiny town on the edge of Ireland. And it would be some Irish acts, but a lot of UK acts. And, we had, over the years, we had The National, we had Lanois, we had Amy Winehouse, we had lots of cool people. And you would get these sort of intimate moments with them. One that comes to mind is with Ryan Adams. Like, in my entire 25-year music life, I don't think I've worked with a more difficult person. I think it would be fair to say that he was like a petulant child. He was impossible. I mean, just an impossible human to deal with. And then he started singing, and I literally crumbled in front of him. Like, I was ready to punch him in the face. He was just so obnoxious.
You wouldn't do it.
Just a backstory. When they arrived, his tour manager was wearing combat fatigues and looked like someone who had stepped out of combat. And he said to me, we talked for a minute. He said, "Look, you seem like a nice guy. You seem like someone who cares about what he's doing. I can't help you." He's like, "I just can't help you here, right?" That basically Ryan Adams is out of fucking control, right? And
Wow.
so 4 times he threatened to cancel the gig, right, over soda or whatever the fuck. That sounds like an exaggeration.
No,
it's
I'm
actually
sure
true,
it was
right?
that. Yeah.
And then he started singing. He was playing with the guitar player from his band, the Cardinals, and who just died recently. Name will come to me in a second. Anyway, acoustic gig, the two of them on stage, and they start playing, and I literally, couldn't stand up, just sat down on the ground like a child in front of them, and mouth open, just being fucking schooled on, magic.
Presence.
Yeah, exactly.
This is it. I don't make this. The mic choice doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This comes from somewhere else.
Yeah.
This is fucking profound. And I had those moments. But
Man.
if I didn't have that,
Amy Winehouse.
crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So few and far between. I wish. I want you to continue, but I have a lot on that topic.
But
it's our job to draw it out.
But what happened in those moments is I realized that, I could take, so if you say, hey, we recorded some of those singers with a Beta 57, that is cause for war in some people's camp. Like, oh my God, the worst mic ever, right? Swap in a 58, swap in a KMS 105.
Whatever it is.
Swap in an 87, Doesn't matter. Amy Winehouse, still Amy Winehouse, still Amy Winehouse, still fucking profound, whatever.
Yeah.
And I got to do that in real time, right? But mostly you realize, hey, we don't make this. Engineers don't make this. Now, what does matter is that I get the stage ready.
Have your shit together.
That I have my shit together.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I know.
You know, that you would say to the younger interns and stuff, hey, if we have a disagreement over something, we take it to the back room. You know, we have candles lighting. We control the amount of people in the room. We make sure it's not too hot or too cold. You know, the instruments are tuned when they get up on stage. You know, just like everything is ready and in tune, so they can just pick up and focus. And you realize that you can't create the magic, but you can certainly
set the conditions.
Where it might happen.
Yeah, the likelihood. Exactly.
Right.
Like, I definitely know that if the guitar is buzzing, if the guitar is buzzing, they haven't had lunch, the hotel room is janky, you know, the sound is shit, that the likelihood of getting a good performance is lower.
Preparedness creates opportunities.
Yeah. Now, and then the confounding thing is you've had situations where everything is wrong and the magic shows up. And you know, in our whale watching analogy, that's the weird hippie.
Yeah.
That's
weird
the
hippie on
humbling
surfboard.
fact.
If we had the data on that, you'd probably see that happening less.
It must happen less.
You know.
And why would you take that chance?
But
right?
that's
It's
why
not
they're
sustainable.
Well, that's why there are professional studios and professional trained engineers and producers that have a track record of success, that you hire them, that label hires them for this purpose, and they bring the team in. You know,
This is, you know, trying to explain this particularly to clients, young clients of mine back in Ireland, is saying, you know, labels are a kind of bank.
Yeah, it's
They're
risk. It's risk
investing.
assessment.
And the reason that they would choose, you know, an A-list mixer or a B-list mixer over you is that it's a blue chip stock, or it's something that has been proven to perform over time. Now, you might be, you know, the 1 in a million tech unicorn. You might be the next big thing, but that's not the game they're in.
tech unicorn.
Yeah,
That's funny.
You know what
the
a,
word.
That's
a unicorn.
Well,
you know what
yeah.
that means, right?
Yeah.
Proud of you.
Well, that makes me think of something, and Michael and I have talked a bit about this. What you're basically saying, along with preparedness, is do your job, right? So your job is not to be the star. That's not your job. Your job is to create the circumstance for the star to maximize their output. We don't really have a roadmap for what a modern engineer looks like. We don't even have it. Like, we've tried to kind of write some things down on what it looks like. It's not like it used to be. It's somewhat like it used to be. But the majority of engineers that I know, that I work with, didn't come up in a studio, right? So they didn't get that proper mentor and training in a room and understand their job is to get the coffee to the right temperature, or what, like black tea or green tea. Like, these things actually matter to the artist, but that's not the case in a lot of home studios. You're not even thinking that. I mean, I think about it. If I have an artist up here, the first thing I ask is, what do they want, right? And then as I get to know them better, like, I have the tea ready, or I know they want espresso, and I've been jamming on my espresso game, so I'm gonna pull up and I'm gonna kill the espresso for them. Like, I want to bring a full holistic experience to their record making, and I'd like to think that that's something that I'm good at this point, and why people would come work with me. But we don't have a ladder. We don't have a new way of formatting what the engineer looks like and their role is.
Yeah.
And I think we need to workshop that.
I think that's a core. That's sort of one of the core topics that we're going to jam on over this conversation.
So I'm down.
Can I jump to one of your other? Well,
follow
a
you.
quick thing on transparency, which is, I think that when we use the word transparent, so we're imagining something profound, keep coming back to that word, but something magical is happening in front of you. So we have Amy back from the dead. She's here in the gift shop. She's about to sing. And we've got an upright bass player, a trap kit, and a Rhodes player, right? We've got them here in the room, in this big space.
What do you mean trap kit? Like an 808?
Yeah.
That's where my brain went
exactly,
too.
bro. Yeah, sorry.
I know what you
Yeah.
mean, though.
Again, showing my
We're
age.
aging. I know.
Yeah.
We're the same age.
Sorry. Yeah,
I know,
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
aging us.
So, but we've got this low-key jazz combo, right? And we want to capture it. And there's the idea of transparency. So when you say transparent to a kid who makes rock records, or someone who's into like Grimes, and it sounds
Weak.
It sounds, oh, you mean like a Millennia Pre?
Tepid.
And you know, as someone who owned Millennia Pre's, they
Sterile.
are low distortion to a degree, but they're not transparent. So something that we need to separate, and you know this, I'm not teaching you this, we're teasing it out, is there are things that are emotionally transparent and sonically less so. So there are things that change the signal less but transmit the emotion more poorly, and things that change the signal more but actually maintain the spirit or
the emotional connection is clearer.
Connection. Yes. And that is kind of confounding, because when you think about distortion and frequency response and all the stuff that I can jam on for days, you think, well, if we get that all perfect, then, you know, we're good. But if you imagine someone singing an angry vocal, right? If they're singing a vocal and it's passionate and angry, we can capture it with a GML and a DPA microphone, right? Which is a very clean, transparent chain. Or we can sort of capture it with, you know, an SM58 and a Neve, you know, and add to the energy or capture the energy more, as bad examples, but capture the energy more authentically. You know, the distortion in the pre, the color of the transformers, the proximity of the mic to their mouth, the spittiness of it, the sound of their mouth cavity compared to a condenser at the right distance or whatever, will be more authentic to the moment, but less of a raw capture of what actually happened in the space, right? And that's, you know, we need to come.
That's a really important
emotional immediacy and the clarity of the message.
Yes.
Also, I want to just add, because that was part of, I wanted to go with the transparency, but then we kind of went on other things too that were really important. But there's a moment that you decide when to manipulate. So that's a good example of, because by no means am I saying, or are any of us saying, that every record should be in its purest form always. We got thinking about trap in its pure form. What does that even mean?
Well, emotionally, it should be. That's always the goal.
Yeah, but that's emotionally. That's not sonically.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
I'm talking about manipulating sound sonically to create the emotion, the desired emotion.
But it's always the focusing of a lens emotionally.
Yeah, we're talking emotional transparency.
Yeah.
But we have
subjective.
So you may saturate something to make its intention clearer, or what's in there clearer.
Yeah. I also, I completely, completely get that.
I mean, we watch Tony do this all the time. The way he can bring out the character in a sound to make it feel more like it is.
More like it is,
More like it is.
Yeah.
And that's not always using the most sonically transparent piece of gear.
Right.
So that's the distinction that we have to draw. And I'm glad you brought that up.
It's I feel like that was kind of a clunky way of describing it, but we're
not looking at cleanliness only.
No, or technical transparency. There's something about this division between emotional transparency and, you know, technical accuracy. I don't know. We can play with those words.
But I like to think about the gear in that sense, because this is really important. Thinking about the gear and where Spider started with a certain piece of gear that we like what's that marker that it describes why we like it, right?
What is the objective truth about our taste in gear?
But having that lens, having that purely transparent front end lens allows you to do that sonic manipulation to get that desired emotional outcome inside of that lens, right? It's just giving you that super wide angle, right? You can see it all, and then you can vignette it, or then you can shape it the way you want to, but you at least have that access.
Well, that's why I like to...
You're not pigeonholing yourself right away by having this super small transistory distortion sound. It's like you can't take back later.
Yes.
You're that's my fight against that.
This is why and on the transparency point, why I don't like to think of speakers as gear.
Yes. Monitoring is not gear.
Speakers are part of the room.
Yes.
Right? And the whole monitoring chain is the studio.
Yes, it's built in.
Right? So that's not gear. All the stuff on the front end when you're mixing, on the front end, I mean like the mix print.
Yeah.
Like everything
that's what I'm calling the front end.
Print.
Exactly.
And then when you're listening through or playing back, that's the studio.
Yeah.
And so you want transparency on that side.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want sonic transparency.
So you can make all the other moves.
So that you can have that emotional relationship with what's there.
And then, I mean, the monitoring, that's a whole episode, and we did the conversation on it already, but again, there is a...
no, we going further
That
on
doesn't mean flat. And,
No.
There are rigs that we've tuned and rooms that we've done where the low end is up a lot on flat, but that's kind of home for a given artist. If you're making hip hop or whatever, it feels like home.
Yeah, if you
and
like to go loud and not be in pain.
It feels right.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to that.
Yeah,
Michael, you had some points
note.
you wanted to jump on.
Yeah. The whole time I'm thinking about this, I'm imagining a young audio engineer hearing this. They're like, man, that sounds dope. But how come I can't do it? Right. And it's like, and I was tracing this back to what Spider was saying really early in the conversation about stress and its impact on your enthusiasm over time. To me, stress is like going to cause you to seek certainty, seek the red pill, blue pill answer. And it's usually forcing you to think in a very binary manner.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
And because of that,
It's turning off your nervous
you'll turn
system.
to a gear manufacturer, a friend who doesn't know what they're talking about, but they're so confident in the fact that you need this piece of gear that you're like, okay, cool. That's how I'm going to get out of this hole. And ultimately,
People love to sound knowledgeable.
yeah, I mean, that's a whole different
do.
topic, but it's like, I think, so you have the stress, which leads to you seeking certainty, which leads to you overvaluing the wrong, quote unquote, wrong things.
Yes.
Because you don't know what to value.
You can take away the
but
quotes.
consumer-
It's just wrong.
consumerism.
yeah, the thing that your friend told you is the thing you'll value. And so that's where people's luck then goes to shit, because now you're overvaluing either opportunity and you're just hustling all the time out in LA and you have no gear or skill, just out there.
Right.
Or the other way around, you're like super technical and you can record anything ever, but no
Nobody
one knows who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
Or both sides are just weak. Like you really haven't prepared and you're not really seeking opportunity, or you don't know how to develop these relationships. And so it's like, but all of that maps back to being stressed out. And it's like, if that goes away.
The stress is going to put pressure on our bad tendencies.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I love, as an aside, something that you do. I think I've done it before, maybe Spider too, but you do it a lot, is sketch extremes. I love how you just sketched out two ends of a continuum.
Yes.
And it's something I think I'm learning from you, is it's very good for sort of figuring out, a
Where
problem.
do you sit?
Yeah. Or just sort of, what are the bounds here? What are the two extremes? Okay, then where do we want to be? Where are we? Whatever. I think it's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
And then you keep going.
Yeah. I mean, speaking to incentives, and this is something I saw in that documentary, which the name totally slips my mind right now. We could put it in the show notes because we'll have those.
Self.
Century of the Self. Look it up on YouTube. It's incredible.
BBC.
But you'll learn and realize through this documentary that, and it's kind of clear if you take a step back, that companies and even politicians are incentivized by driving a divide between people, right? You want to have polar opposites, because then you could speak to one of them. You could speak to a side, right? If I'm just like, look, I agree with you, but I also agree with that guy. Like, eventually, you don't really agree with anyone. You don't really have an opinion, and people really seek that opinion. I don't want to get political.
Tribalism leads to manipulation. No, it does.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this was architected over time in America and in the world. But speaking about America specifically, it's what I've experienced my whole life. I mean, that leads to manufacturers, politicians, companies of any kind trying to fall into one side of that continuum. And I think what we do really well, and I just love modeling things out.
Right.
And so I'm modeling what we're doing really well and drawing them out, is we're looking at both sides of the argument to the ultimate extremes. As ridiculous as one side might sound, even to us. Like, I mean, I just mean to us, not objectively.
We have to go further,
just to see what does that other side look like.
Yeah, to try it on.
And then where do we sit? Are we closer to that other side, which we initially disagreed with? Well, we wouldn't have known if we didn't even acknowledge that there's another side.
Yeah.
And
what of value is there in there?
Because there's a reason that half the population believes this thing. Maybe you know, there's some truth in there, some way that we could even if it just means helping us communicate better.
Yeah, where's the common ground?
Are we talking about the half the population that thinks antelope converters are good, or what?
That's what I'm wondering. Are you on team SSL or Neve? You know, like what side are you on?
There's a Mixdown industrial complex version.
There is, of course.
Agreed.
At every level of society, there's that.
No, we should go really far into that.
Yeah. I think, Can
I jump back to Michael on stress? And keeping, because I want to make the distinction between being stressed and having cortisol raised and being adrenalized by music, right? Because there's a moment when it could be stress, and because you feel a certain way about it, there's an anxiety, there's this building kind of heat that you're like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't be stressed, versus maybe you have to lean into that for a moment, and that might be in that 13th hour. And I'm definitely not one to necessarily push for working for extended periods of time, because I think productivity goes down. But in those moments, sometimes you have to push further. And I would want to not deter people from that because they think it's stress, right?
Yeah.
But
there's an important distinction to make there.
Yeah.
I mean, because what you're talking about is episodic stress. It's like when Lady Gaga asks how many songs we can do before the mastering date in 9 days. That was an episode.
Yeah, you just say yes.
We had 8-9 days together,
24/7,
mixing around the clock.
Changed my life, really. The story is a life changer.
Let's do it. Let's hear it.
Transformative.
Well, I had been hanging out that day at the studio. It was the third time I hung out with Tony, and second time with Spider. Tony and the three of us were just chatting. We're listening to records. I think we were listening to some stuff that I was working on with my homie Addison, and we were just like getting into it. And Tony's like, "Oh man, you know how to make things sound good. That's cool." Then he gets a really important phone call, and then I realize now, knowing Tony for so long, that every phone call that he makes is super, super important. Like everything is a big gig coming up. But he gets off the phone. He's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing tonight?" I was like, "Oh man, I'm really busy." Like trying to play it off cool because I had no work.
Yeah.
Just kind of was like, "Yeah, I'm really busy."
They're talking about transparency and authenticity here. And
I didn't know any better then. I
25? You were 24.
24. 24. And then he's like, oh, that sucks, because that was Lady Gaga's manager and she wants me to mix 2 songs and they have to be done tonight. I thought maybe you can like do them with me. I was like, oh yeah, I'm cool. I'm cool to do that.
Let me clear my schedule.
Yeah, let me clear my schedule.
Yeah.
So it was, Spider was in the studio, Justin, Tony's assistant, Justin Herget, a fantastic mix engineer as well, and I remember Tony had just gotten that day, he got this, the retro stay level. I'll never forget it because I have one and I don't even use it, to be honest.
This is why you got
one.
But
I got one because of the story. I've never really used it. I mean, maybe once every 6 months.
It's a great reminder, though.
It's a great reminder because he was so pissed with this vocal. I think he was on the song Marry the Night. He was so pissed. He like gets out of the seat. He's like, I don't know what the fuck to do with this. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. You figure it out. It's phenomenal. I mean, she killed this vocal performance.
Yes.
And so Tony left, and I see the stay levels. Like I've never seen that before, but it reminded me of the Gates compressor that it so happens, I guess, is
based on.
Based on that. I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
And I asked Justin to patch it in, and he patches it in. I just turn the input knob all the way up. To see what it does, right?
Yes.
Just my instinct always as a kid.
See what it does.
Just see what it does.
Yeah.
And it just distorted it even more, and it brought out all this fundamental like goodness. Like, oh, that at least it's the most bold version of what that sound source was.
Yes.
Right.
Then you know it was intentional.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Tony comes in, he's just like, never would have done that. That's tight. Cool. And then like sits down and moves on from there and fucks with other things, fucks with the drums. I mean, I'm sure he tweaked the vocal. In my story, in my version of the story, he leaves the vocal alone, you know? I don't know if he did. I don't necessarily care if he did, but that was enough of a moment to know that he trusted me on that thing, right? So send that mix. And another one, I forgot the next song that we did. I know Married the Night was one of the 2 that first night. She loved it, found the next day that we're getting 6 more songs. So Tony winds up like booking another studio. Asked me to move in across the hall. That was kind of a pivotal moment in my career of being like, but we were up all night. I remember one of the most fascinating things, and I'll kind of end on this bit, but it's just such a good moment of Tony and I in the studio, is he's asleep on the couch trying to get a 30-minute nap. I'm messing with something because the producer's about to show up that morning. He goes, "Snare's too loud." And I was like, "No, it's not." He goes, all right, cool, I trust you. Just like, that was it. It was like the snare is the thing. Like, granted we had been working on it, in context. We already knew it was in a good place. But it's just, that's trust, right? So worst case, the producer asks us to turn the snare down. But in that, we're all objectively together in this thing. We're all taking turns. And it's this camaraderie and this team effort that doesn't seem to exist much. And that's that stressful moment. That's adrenaline. I didn't feel stress at all, man. We were thriving in that moment.
Excitement
In the room.
Well, the stress is indistinguishable from excitement on a biological level. The anxiety is the story part.
Yes,
the story. That's really important.
Yeah.
Something.
It's just energy in the body.
And aside, I think when you haven't experienced a profound artistic moment, it can be difficult to sort of imagine. And the same with when you haven't experienced someone like Tony, when you're me on the island and you don't have access to these great engineers. Tony is he's very confident dude. But his openness at that point, someone who was insecure, someone who felt threatened by you, etc., would have come back in the room and be like, "That's crazy, kid.
Yeah.
Back it off. Like let the grown-ups.
Let the grown-ups,
And he came in and intuited immediately. This is better.
Because
Done.
that's what he heard in your music. It's that emotional thing you were doing. That's what I heard too.
When you look at Tony's career arc and the fact that he's still working at the level that he's working all these years later, right? That's it. That there he's open and he's always serving the record.
But I think about that level of investment, right? Like, it was an important record to Tony, right?
Yeah.
Important record comes through, and look at the level of, like, the amount of trust that he put in you. You know what I mean? Because he understands it's an investment, but that's like the thing that you're talking about we're all missing, right? We're not in these sort of hierarchical, generational working relationships.
Yeah.
But when you are, like, people who have the skills and the insight can identify people that they want to make those investments in. Yeah. And that's how we all ratchet up, like, together.
But I should add to that, though, because this is an important thing to follow with. That scenario went really well, and he took a chance, right? We all know Tony. Tony could have, if that didn't work out, he'd just sit down. He'd make it work out.
Yeah.
That exact scenario, maybe not with Gaga, but with another artist of that caliber, has happened again and didn't work out the same way in my favor, right? He has said, because he's looking for perspective. He's looking for another perspective, even if it's just jumping off point. He could take it from there and then do with it as he pleases, but he's looking for that spark that maybe in that moment he knows that he can't find, right? So his relevancy, his ability to stay open is because of that.
Yes.
It's because he takes that chance. He can do anything by himself, but why do everything by yourself?
Yes.
When you don't have to.
The first time I came to the States, so I've been with my wife for 20 years, and the first time we came to visit California, so Irish kid coming over, and her dad is a pilot. He used to fly private jets for Pepsi and a whole bunch of people, but he had his own plane, I can't remember what it was at the time, maybe a Cessna or a Beechcraft or whatever. And the first time he took me up flying, we're in Bakersfield, and we get up, and we're the two of us are out in the morning, and it's great. First time in a small plane, I'd never been in one. And he's showing me how the controls work and what's what. And, I had some kind of an understanding of what was what, but he's teaching me. And then at some point he just says, "Okay, you fly." And I'm like, there was no like understanding that this is what we were doing. You're learning so you can start flying.
Yeah, he threw you in the water.
Yeah, he threw me in the water, and I came back with, no, I can't, it's not safe, whatever. And he was like, "Kid, there's nothing you can do with this plane that I can't get us out of." He was like, you can dime any control in any direction, and I can. And he'd been like, he had some crazy amount of hours, like at the time, like absurd.
They train those scenarios,
and he knows I'm sensible, and pretty soon, I wasn't going to do anything crazy.
You wouldn't be in the plane if you weren't.
No, but that confidence is kind of what I see Tony coming back into the room with. It's like he sees this thing, you take a chance, If it's good, he rolls with it. If it's not, he fixes it.
Yeah.
Easy. But that's the kind of that's the confidence that comes from just doing it over and over.
It's also
and over
creating
and over.
opportunity for that thing to happen.
Opportunity,
Yes,
completely.
mentorship at its
Opportunity
finest.
for someone and an opportunity for the magic part.
That's really good.
Yes.
That's really, really good. Yeah.
investing.
And it's just one of the things that sets him apart.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who can pick a record from a mixer or a producer and say, I could mix a record like that. And it's like, maybe you could, you know, once,
Yeah.
you know, but to keep showing up, to keep bringing that openness, to keep bringing a level of consistency, you know, that's,
And to benefit from other like team, like to maintain that sort of all those relationships and coordinate all that energy.
When I moved here first, I've told you this, but I had this understanding, this idea that some people lucked into their gig. So, you know, they just had a hit and they're not really that good. And, you know, I know people who are better than them, whatever. And I've told you the story with the name Spider, but there was this one early on in my time with PMC, there was this one producer who's still very big and mainstream and went to his house to demo some speakers for PMC, a big rig, the biggest rig we made at the time, BB5XBD. Very long, involved demo process. You know, it involved renting a truck for the company to bring the rig.
Right.
We demoed the speakers twice in 2 different venues. Everyone, this is very rare, everyone in his team was an asshole. He was an asshole. Every interaction was difficult. We set up the rig in a house in a big fancy house, one of 2 houses that he had in a very fancy neighborhood. And they didn't even listen that one time, right? I mean, you know, days of work. That one of the rare, very sour experiences I had with PMC. But I remember the second demo, went in the studio and I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't have a playback rig with me. I was coming from somewhere else. The rig had been delivered and I needed a source material. I needed some music to hear the rig, to check that it was working. No, actually, the rig had been delivered. This was the second time. They'd blown a driver in the rig, you know.
Already?
Already, right? So I was back to repair the rig, but I didn't have my stuff with me. So I was like, hey, is there something I can play? Like, there was no computer in the room. They're like, oh, Pro Tools rig is being rebuilt, so we don't have Pro Tools. CD player, oh yeah, we've no CDs, right? So there was no audio except the assistant was like, oh, there's an MPC, you know? So I was like, okay, whatever, I just need sound to see if sound is coming out of all the drivers. So get the MPC and there's like, you know, whatever, however many pads. And I just hit the pads to see what was up. And there was the bare skeleton bones of a song, like just the very initial, some grooves, loops, and some vocal stuff, and I listened to the various bits, and you know, and got the speakers working, left the studio, and really annoyed with this client. Every interaction had been really difficult, and I went home, went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and before I opened my eyes, that song was in my head. Like just the second I woke, the groove was in my brain. I was like, fuck. He's good. He's really fucking good. I don't like him.
Yeah.
Dealing with him is a pain in my ass, but he's really good at what he does. And over, I've seen that. People I don't like, people I wish weren't as good as they were, but the people who make it tend to be really fucking good. And that's something that when you're out on the island isn't always clear. You imagine that some people just kind of lucked into the gig, you know?
Yeah. People are really good.
They might not do
Especially
what you like.
in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Like the best of the best seem to come here at some point. Whether they stay here or not is up to them. It's hard, right? It's hard. The competition is high. You have to be great. You have to be prepared. You have to be practiced.
Yes.
And it feels good. I mean, if you're at all competitive, this is a place to be in it. You know, I'm definitely a bit of a sore loser. So
Yeah.
competitive.
On the idea of the investment on the preparedness side.
Yes.
The thing Tony said in the clip on the Instagram from Tony's talk that he cut out, the one where he says, "This stuff is never going to be in a book.
Oh, yeah, it's
and
so
it's
good.
your job to pass it down."
Fucking love that.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, that there's no incentive for a gear manufacturer to get behind that message. The idea that this is, you know, sort of hard-earned.
Unless your incentive is for the community to grow.
Of course. Well,
Do
that's,
you know what I mean? And that has to do, you know.
But how does that hit your bottom line?
Well,
has
think about this.
for
This is
PMC.
this is the way we're approaching the PMC marketing, which is like the more people that are better at what they do, the more they'll appreciate what we have to offer.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So the incentive for us is to be a tide that raises all boats.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know?
And then you sell fancy boats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Expensive boats.
but I mean, but
Yeah.
we're doing it together for
Someone's
the right
gonna
reasons.
buy the boats.
you know?
Yeah.
The boats get bought.
For sure.
You can market products without ethical, violations.
Oh, of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Well,
Like
Seth Godin is awesome on that,
Marketing
you
does
know.
not need to be a corrupt practice.
No. There's people have needs and you serve them at every level. Michael, you're scribbling away like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, being mindful of time, but I
Nah, we're just freewheeling.
There's a really important thing about stress that we've sort of almost got to a few times, just like the difference between episodic stress and chronic stress. So the episodic stress is like these awesome situations where you get to prove yourself, like the Gaga record, or the football season leading to the Super Bowl. Like there's those stress chemicals are pumping through these guys' bodies, right? But there's a shape to it. There's an envelope. There's this rise, this build, and then it's down. And that is what makes us stronger. And when we do it together with teamwork, that's what binds us together. And so the episodic stress, you don't want a constant level of stress, a chronic stress that actually degrades your biological systems and puts pressure on your worst tendencies, and you will adapt and cope with that stress somehow, and you won't actually be able to choose the ways that you do, right? So it's unhealthy mentally and physically.
Yes.
So, but if you have lower chronic stress, then you're ready for these episodic events where you can
You
really
pick and choose when to do it.
and it's and what's partly what makes it less stressful is that you elect to do it when you're doing it, and that there's an end in sight.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking something that you're experiencing stress that you don't see an end to, then that's what makes it chronic.
Yeah.
And then you have to do something about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thinking about what that means for an engineer and like their next choice. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a client here in LA who's going to use us for room tuning, room design stuff. Yeah. And he was gunning for change. He's not happy with his room and he wants to make a move. And one of the things he said to me is, Sweetwater are offering, 0% financing on things. So I'm going to get these, I think it was the ATC 110s, same speakers that I use, right? And he was like, I'm just going to do this. And because they're great and it's a move and I can do it, right? And I'm saying to him, can we just press pause for a second and figure out what you're trying to do? What's the big objective here? Because yes, you can get the speakers and get them in the room, but if the room's not ready, you're not going to be able to capitalize on that move. But aside from that, $600 a month, whatever the payment was, it's not insignificant, right? And it may be the difference for you between choosing a gig that you want or need that doesn't pay as well.
Right.
Now, I don't really know where this guy is in his career arc. That's part of what we do is try and figure that out, right?
Yeah.
And serve, it's a very different conversation with Max Martin than it is with some kid who just moved to town, right?
Right.
But the idea that certain financial choices, like buying that gear, that dope gear, constrain you. They commit you to having to take records you don't want, or having to work at Starbucks, or having to ask your parents for money, wherever you are on that arc, right? They limit you. So the idea of being lean and making sort of, purposeful, minimal purchases, and strategic, and for
building with a mindset of building something.
Something I say to young engineers all the time is like, you're in LA. If you need something, we've got it. Like, I've got it. Someone's got it. You can borrow it. You can rent it. It's here. There are studios that you can get for $300 a day or $500 a day that are absurd in terms of, if you want a Neve console, you can get in a room for probably $400. If that's the thing you think you need, you don't need it. But if you think you do, so why burden yourself with a payment? Or when I set up my second studio, my own studio, my first studio, separate from my brother, I borrowed at the time $40,000 in Ireland, in a small town in Ireland, and bought like a HD rig and lots and lots of stuff, Sound Deluxe microphones and all this stuff. I bought a rig. I bought a full studio of stuff. Would I do that again? I absolutely would not. It was the wrong move. Now, are there kids that I would bet 40 grand on? For sure.
Yeah.
I've met them. Yeah. And it's not an age thing. I've met 21-year-olds where I'm like, I'd put my money on you, bro.
Yeah.
But you need to think about your choices in that context. They limit freedom.
Yes.
And you may be better off with a laptop and an interface and one mic and the freedom to take the gig than a whole ton of gear and a day job to pay for it or whatever.
Not even the just take the gig, the practice of your own craft that doesn't even rely on a gig.
Yes, just being at home jamming. Yeah.
The ability to freestyle.
I mean,
and not feel the pressure.
Do people believe they can achieve freedom?
Wait,
you know what I mean? Like, I think
that's a whole episode.
I think this goes to this sort of blue collar mentality that we were talking about, like, bragging about working 7 days a week, like weeks and weeks in a row. And
yes, from A-list engineers.
Yeah.
Well, I had a good conversation with Tony on the phone the other day about this, is that I was kind of professing to him that I'm going to do my best to only work 4 to 5 days a week. At this point in my life, at 34, before I'm 54, however, I'm going to make it a deliberate search for freedom.
Well, this has been an interesting part of the COVID thing. It's because the pace of your life slowed down, and you notice differences in your work that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise because of the chronic stress level comes down.
Yes,
yeah,
and I'm still working plenty, and I'm still feel good about the work, but I don't feel like I have to do much more to uphold this lifestyle that I'd like to live. Right, so. I don't think this is something that people talk about. You're kind of always on the hustle. And I think there's a lot to that. And I think if a record came in tonight after we were recording this podcast and I was so passionate about it, I would stay up all night and I would do it. I don't think that life should be planned accordingly for that. I think that you should search for that freedom to read a book, to sit down, to do something else, to hang out with your...
But it seems so far away. I mean, I wonder how many engineers working today who have parents who've ever experienced financial freedom. Culturally, I think it seems so far away for people that they don't actually ever imagine actually doing it.
Yeah, well, this is
you can be strategic with your finances to produce that freedom for you.
Yeah,
I love in the sort of mainstream.
It takes discipline. I mean, it takes real strategy and in
commitment. The mainstream space. Gary Vee is great on that. He's Gary Vee is a sort of a marketing guru, for lack of a better word. If you don't follow him, he's on Instagram and he's on everything. But Instagram, he's really big on, hey, do you need the latest phone? Do you need those trainers? Do you need the flash apartment? Why are you taking money from your parents? Spend less, save more, hustle, work on your craft. Just this idea of so many people are living sort of an outsized lifestyle that they can't afford, or that they can afford, but severely limits their ability to be creative or
it
to
slows
develop.
their development.
Yes, or maybe inhibits it forever.
Yeah.
And this is something that we've talked about, which is the sort of chronic problem of the direct pipeline of other people's success into our eyeballs.
Right.
We're constantly tormented by, so-and-so's Bugatti and Kim Kardashian's ass and whatever, like other people's stuff that they have, their cribs and their houses and their holidays and their, vacations rather.
Yeah.
Their success. Something that I've described in conversations we've had is this idea that, basically I grew up poor, but everyone I knew was poor too. So there was no yardstick to measure my, poverty is the wrong word, but my poorness. You know what I mean? Nobody had foreign vacations. Nobody had new cars. So we were all good. We played ball. Sure. We had food. I was never hungry. But if I had spent 3 hours a day looking at a small screen that showed me, in general, that we all need to live up to a certain level of, iPhone modernity or, clothes we wear or cars we drive.
Yeah, but what does it look like? Like, how can you express financial freedom on social media?
Well,
how do you signal it? Because it's not a thing that can be signaled.
Yes.
It's like...
Yeah.
It's not a it's a circumstance. It's not
and it ties into something interesting that I saw when I came here, which is quite often I would meet people with outsized lifestyles or studios, and it would take a minute to realize, oh, this is a trust fund kid or someone who has inherited or whose family is fabulously wealthy and they're getting to live the life and create and make the records they want because they have opportunity. And I know some great people in that situation. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, you see that on Instagram and it sort of creates an unrealistic baseline that people feel they need to spend their way up to. And I think something that we would advocate, we have done in person more than once, is stick with what you have, sell that, because
simplify.
People have problems. Hey, my shit doesn't sound great. And they're like, how do I buy my way out of this problem?
Right.
And we're like, oh, maybe you
Mixdown
sell your way out of this problem.
That's what I'm saying. That's consumerism.
It is consumerism.
I mean, look, the Mixdown industrial complex is serving a community.
Yes.
Who is consumerist. It's a societal thing,
So part of what we're doing with this conversation is working to change that, working to bring a different perspective. I think something that we've talked about more than once, John, on Instagram or on Google Meets and stuff over the last couple of months is this idea of journey versus destination. So many other platforms, I mean, I don't think it's wrong to name them. I think things like Mix with the Masters or Gearsluts or brands are selling the idea of a destination. Buy this, do this, work with these people, take this course, and you will achieve this. And what we're sort of kind of obsessed with is the idea that there is no destination and you need to work on the quality of the journey, right?
Yeah.
It sounds a little high-minded, but really...
No, I have no idea how to get there.
It's a little stoic.
And there's something to...
I mean, it's a personal development focus.
Should we riff on the whale watching thing for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. So, because we mentioned it a couple of times. So, the whale watching analogy is something that came up one night on one of our Google calls when we were figuring out how the conversation was going to meet. The conversation that was actual, which was John and Michael's project, was going to meet the podcast, which was an idea that Spider and I had been kicking around for a year at least at this point, and we'd been sort of honing in our mind what it was and what it wasn't, and may never have happened, but which is why we
if
need
not for the
John Castelli, Chief Momentum Officer, and Michael.
We were helping with their branding workshop.
You were, yeah.
And we realized that we were building the same community. It's the same community.
Same gig. Same gig. And we were sort of outsized voices in the actual conversation because we had stuff to say, right?
Yeah.
So one of the nights we were riffing about what was wrong with the Mixdown industrial complex, and I mentioned this whale watching analogy. So the idea is that, we all agree that whales are magical beautiful creatures, just incredible. And to see one is to be in the presence of something bigger than we really understand, right? I'm not a God person. I couldn't be more atheistic, but to see a whale is something special.
It's transcendent.
Yeah, it's transcendent. And it puts things in a context that you didn't, it sort of grounds you in a way that, grounds
it's like
you
seeing,
when you're out on a boat.
It's like really seeing the stars.
Yeah. So there's something profound about it. Yeah. And the idea that imagine a world where you want to see whales and you focus on your boat and how big your boat is and how fast your boat is and what kind of motor you have and the sonar, the comfort of the seats, the amount of life jackets, the how trick your radio is, and how ridiculous that would seem, because the boat is not magic. The boat isn't special. The magic is the whale, right? Now, does a trick boat allow you to get out there and maybe give you more opportunity? Maybe, sometimes. But there's a old surfer dude that we mentioned earlier who just paddles out every day in the bay on his beat up board, and maybe he sees more whales than you because he's showing up regularly. He's not spending a bunch of money and he's not focused on the wrong things. He's not looking at his sonar screen when he could be looking out at the ocean. He's just got a simple setup and he's open to the possibility of something great happening. And I feel like it's a good analogy for where we're at in the music business right now, in the equipment sort of world or education world of music, the record capture world, is this focus on tools and techniques and sort of ego and stars instead of these profound moments, these whales that we should be open to. And the thing is, you can have the boat, you can have the sonar, you can get out in the bay or way out in the ocean 10 times, 20 times, 50 times in a row and not see a whale. And you can paddle in the bay in your beat up surfboard and catch it 5 times in a week. Whales are whales. They show up when they show up, right? Now, by getting out in the water every day, you're maximizing your chances, no question. And you can do that in either, right? You can do that, with whatever you've got. But to focus on the gear is wrong. And to fetishize a beat up surfboard because surfer dude saw more whales on that is also wrong. You know what I mean? So you have this thing where like, well, so-and-so recorded such and such record on an old Neotech. It's like, well, old Neotechs are okay, but they don't make whales happen. You know what I mean? Just because Albini pulled in utero out of an old Neotech.
Yeah, that puts gear in context.
It might have been Nirvana. You know what I mean? It might not have been the Neotech, right?
Yeah.
So it cuts both ways. It's wrong to fetishize.
How many engineers? How often do you hear engineers in awe of the artists they work with, just in pure admiration of the choices they make, and are there to serve that? I very often hear cynical talk about artists.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
And
course.
that is not like,
How much clip getting they had to do, how much whatever they had to do to fix the thing that they had to do. It's like, what did you not have to do?
well, that's all what an engineer didn't do upstream from you.
Exactly.
It's on
And-
the artist's fault.
Yes, and this is the topic of another conversation, which is sort of where we're at in this minute of music, which is something that one of our notes is in our potential topics idea is, why do so many records sound the same these days? Why in this moment where
It's like everyone's trying to converge on the same record.
Yeah, the gear has never been more democratized. You've never had more power. I mean, the power we have sitting on this fucking desk right now, 4 SM7s.
The potential for diversity is
a Lynx interface.
seemingly unlimited.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just Pro Tools with the stock plugins. There's nothing we couldn't do with this, right?
Yeah.
If we set our minds to it. But it seems that in a given week, a lot of people are making the same record. And something's wrong with that. There's bad incentives. And that doesn't mean there's not a lot of good records being made, because I hear stuff I love.
Of course.
But I hear a lot of crap too.
Yeah.
Go, Michael.
Been thinking about, I tend to think in models, and as you guys all know, this model of that I'm paraphrasing from Jocko Willink / the Navy SEALs, which is to pause, observe, and react or respond in any given situation. That is sort of like the process flow that they're trained in as
Repeat
a Navy
that
SEAL.
again.
So in any
Repeat that again.
Just
repeat it. Repeat that again.
Pause,
Again.
Yeah.
observe,
Twice.
and react. Pause, then observe your surroundings, and then react to them.
Right.
And I'm just thinking about this in context to any industry, specifically audio engineering, right? And thinking about why it's in that order, why it's important to go through each step, and why you should start and follow the order, right? I think what's happening and what's causing a lot of issues in any part of your life, but specifically, let's talk about engineers, is like there's a overvaluing of reactivity, reaction, and a hyper uninformed focus, it seems, on observing, but there's very little time pausing and reflecting. And I think, so it's sort of flipped, like the emphasis is flipped, like the end of just responding, buying the thing, figuring out the trick, right? Based on this observation, there's no time to pause and understand, why am I doing this? What's it for? Who's it serving? And I think
There's no alternative framework.
right. Yeah.
Right.
And to me, that's, again, another benefit I've had in these conversations is we're introducing alternate narratives and alternate frameworks as well. I mean, both of those things to an industry that has just been in sort of a bubble. And as a creative person, yes, I create music, but not often enough to apply it in that situation all the time. It still benefits me because hearing the narratives around creativity and hearing new ones allow you to grow. And that doesn't need to be working with Tony just because John did, right? It
Sure.
doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be one-to-one.
Right.
You might not have any mentors like Tony did. But he
Like
also
I
did.
didn't.
Right.
Really. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not to dismiss a couple of people who helped me in my life.
But influential people and where you find them and what medium and form that information takes on, let that be what it is. But I think it's still important regardless to pause. And I think that part, I think John's amazing at that, right? He meditates for it's over a year now.
16 hours a day.
Yeah, at this point,
He
yeah.
mixes for
And
20 minutes, but those 20 minutes
I know.
are fucking
I mean,
epic.
to
So
me,
does-
if
An
there was,
hour's worth of music in 20 minutes somehow.
Well, we just
It's weird.
speed it up and he just mixes it. You
Yeah.
know.
Can we let Michael finish?
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Just play it back
no,
at 192.
I think like his ability to pause and his it hasn't always been there. It's something that has evolved over time, and I've seen that, and I've like recognized the benefits of it to his work. And again, you don't need to. There's no fee. I mean, technically, there's a subscription to the Waking Up podcast. Shout out. But you could also meditate without that,
That's
right?
one of
you
many.
could-
Of
course.
You could also take a moment to just pause and breathe or whatever, like journal, that's free. Like there are ways to pause that don't cost any money
Yes.
and they're not a new microphone.
Can I put a point
Yeah.
on that? So if
Yeah.
your narrative in a given record making situation is to go fucking Rambo, so you start shooting first
Yeah.
and figure out what's happening later.
Yeah.
So you're picking the mic or the snare sample or the plug-in before you've fucking hit spacebar and took a breath.
Yeah.
Then you're in trouble, you know. And I think something that you've done really well in the time I've known you really well is as somebody who's kind of high energy and very much, you know,
Forward
oriented, momentum oriented, and sort of action oriented.
Yeah.
You're very good at, you have honed this ability to pause. And sometimes it can be very short, but very effective.
Useful.
Yeah, it's
an opportunity,
I can
yeah.
see it happen. It's just like this, like, okay, what we should do is this. And it's just like, it's a beat.
But that's enough, right?
It's enough.
That's all you have to do.
Yeah, it's enough, and you're tapping into something that you've honed, right? But I think the
It's a
narrative, the sort of ego,
Self-check-in.
the ego and gear-centric narrative is to fucking go Rambo on every situation. Just hit it with as many Neve pre's as you can.
React.
And this plug-in. And,
No,
and
dude, 3 of them.
Yeah.
Trust me.
And just fucking, you know, and it's not as sexy to advocate being low-key and
Yeah.
moving a little slower.
Yeah.
And it's and I think something that we're hoping to do with the podcast is to kind of hone some language, because it's something that it's an ongoing project, something that we all do in various pairings.
We want it for each other.
Is you know, we know the value of figuring out these problems,
clarity.
right? Of clarity, but we also know that it's if the idea can only be expressed in a 2-hour long form conversation, then we're not done yet.
Right.
We've got to hone it, and there's a kind of poetry to it where you distill and distill until you can crack someone open with a couple of sentences.
Yeah.
And that's what we're about in with this whole thing. And it, you know, we're going to be working on that for a minute.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I just started working on the pause thing. I kind of want to jump in on it because it's really important to me. And what we're talking about with those, can you say the 3 again?
Pause, observe, and react.
Right?
I think you, instead of observe, I think the other day you said survey.
Yes.
And I feel like survey is a great word for that.
If
Pause,
I
survey,
was
react.
an enemy, I would be more nervous at survey.
Yeah.
Like someone observing me is bad, but
Yeah.
Jacko with fucking surveying me, it's like,
And
I'm
just
dead.
for even
Fucking
more
dead.
context to the listener, this dude is a former Navy SEAL. I mean, this is the most intense situations, stress producing situations you could be in, where there are people that definitely want to kill you in front of you or hidden. So, and they're saying to pause first.
I've been on those sessions.
They actually none of them happened in a studio. I think we can
But
confirm
when,
it.
when thinking about the engineer and saying that they have to pause, we're really and bringing me up and my awareness of wanting to pause. We're exacerbating the narrative that the engineer has time to pause. The engineer is taught to work all night, to work all day, to not stop.
They allow themselves to be.
Yeah, but they were taught it first, and then they were allowed. This is on Gear Sluts. When I used to go on, this is what's on there. This is what they say.
It's the fetishization
Yes.
of the, you know, we call it the blue collar thing, but
Yeah.
the Instagram of the guy showing up at the studio on Sunday with a particular note about, hey, I'm working Sunday,
Yes.
guys.
Yeah, no, it's the opposite.
yeah.
Take Sunday, go for a walk, go on a hike, go to the beach.
Yeah.
Go read a book,
play
learn
with
something
kids.
new, play with your kids. Yeah, exactly. Do something else. I am struggling to do so, but I'm committed to doing so. I'm committed to taking that time. Committed to prioritizing stuff outside of work so work doesn't define me, right? This is the thing, this is the battle that you get to when you have any sort of small amount or large amount of success. I think you cross this path internally in your own conversations and as well as your friend conversations. That's why Michael and I have he's witnessed this, but it's intentional. Like we talked about it before you moved here. Like this is something that was so important to, you know, earlier Michael mentioned like know why you're doing something, have this story, some objective, and then we always talk about the process and the journey towards that objective. I don't even know if I have it now, but I never had a self story, a story that I said, this is what I want the outcome to be. I don't even know if I have it now. I just really like what I do, right? So I think some people are really good at knowing where they want to be in 5 years, or they want to be in a year. I don't share that. I don't, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but what I do know is that I'm going to try to enjoy myself until that point. And in context, some days are not so good, but you find a thing during that day to say, oh, it's better to be here than not to be here, right? Whatever. And in the studio, those times are rare because you're not ever the center of attention, ever. Nor should you be. But some people that are engineers think that they need to have that moment, I think. And they're most likely not going to get it. And if they want it, it's probably not the room or the position in the room for you, because that's not your job. And we talked about earlier, it's to get out of the way so the magic can happen. And you're not the magic. You're rarely creating the magic. You might have a move that goes in there that everybody goes, oh, and there's a moment that like is solely created by you based on the way you manipulated something. That move is forgotten in 30 seconds from then. So if you want to hang on to that moment a little longer, by all means, when no one else is. So that should put into perspective the relative importance of what that move was in the grand scheme of the piece. And then you can place yourself in that role. Now that
engineers don't make whales.
Yeah, exactly. That being said, we should value our position in the room, but also value ourselves outside of that room to have a full picture and storyline to our lives. That's what I got for a second.
I like it. Yeah. I think ultimately, I remember a conversation maybe 2 years ago with you, Spider. I don't even know where we were, but it was this kind of sketching of your arc.
We were across the street at Manuela talking about starting the gift shop and my team.
With Maurice?
With Maurice.
And something that we talked about, if it's the conversation that I remember, was this idea that where maybe your competition, which again is a word I'm coming back to, which I don't really use very often, but your competition are trying to outwork each other. And that for you, something that we were kicking around was this idea of deepening your, maybe that's the night Doubling Down on You came up, or some night around then. But this idea of you're a fast moving sort of forward motion, as Spider often describes it. You have that sort of natural intuition. To deepen that or counter that, you're working on your mindfulness very effectively, way more effectively. I mean, I look at you and go, fuck, I gotta, if I can get 5 days of a streak on the app, I'm happy,
I
right?
had 400 today.
Yeah.
It's mindfulness envy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's probably not part of the process, but this is not. And I'm not taking any credit in the conversation. It's that you were thinking along these lines of kind of making space, and that a happy, centered, mindful, well-fed, well-rested, exercised, fulfilled John Castelli was a far more potent mixer than a John who did, X plus 5 mixes instead of just X. Like
slavish lifestyle.
Why cram in another 3 mixes in the week? Say no, raise your rate, whatever the mechanism is, and deepen who you are instead of sort of stretching in that sort of overwork way.
Stressing. And you're stressing is what you're doing.
And you've been doing that, and it's just working, and it's really heartening to see. And it's I think it's a really powerful. And I remember asking you at an ASCAP one time in the audience, and the question didn't really land, but my question, see what you think of it now, was kind of like, from the perspective of someone who doesn't have what you have, right? It's kind of like, okay, it's easy for you. You've had hit records. You've got this dope studio. You've got, pick any piece of gear in the rack. You've got an Unfair Child. I don't. I've only got the plug-in. It's easy for you to say these things like, you should meditate. I don't have time to meditate, bro. I got to hustle. So do you have I know the answer, but do you have
You do?
Yeah.
I remember you asking me that like it was yesterday.
Yes, but I was asking you as a proxy for the kid in the audience. Not
Of course.
But
do I have a different answer though? I don't know. What's your answer? I'm so curious what your answer is. You said you have one.
I think it's your answer. It's that you can't afford not to do these things. And that even that when I think of working hard, there's always someone who will go harder. And there's always someone who is prepared to make sacrifices to their health or their relationships or their their other gigs or whatever. There's people who will do things that you can't do.
It's not a race you want to win.
Well,
yes, the Seth Godin line, the problem with the race to the bottom is you might win. And I love that.
Yeah.
So I think there are responses to this business that were sort of normalized when it was a different business. So imagine a time, we're talking, late 90s, early 2000s, when the music business was at its peak in terms of sales. CD was fucking rocking and music was a dominant force in culture. Now we're like, video games dominate everything, movies, second to that, the internet, obviously, there's so many things music has sort of been sidelined by, right? Of course, I believe it's hugely important, but but a lot of these responses, so this idea where there's endless demand and you service endless demand by being the guy or girl who goes hard, that seems sort of like ridiculous now.
Yeah,
You know
it
what I
does
mean?
seem ridiculous. I have two thoughts on that, and I don't really have a different answer than what you just said, but it's in the breaks that you prepare yourself for the fire drills when they have to happen, right? So you should still always be down and be motivated to do those late night calls for the thing, for the relationship, for the friend that really needs it at the time, and it's legitimate. You know that the song's coming out tomorrow, and like it's a thing, and you believe in it, and everyone's there. But really, I got tired. I'm 34. I'm in good shape. I eat well. Like I was getting tired, and I wasn't. The more I got booked, I wasn't getting happier. Like it wasn't increasing a sense of pleasure because I was getting booked more. I mean, the sense of pleasure was coming from feeling like I had a voice and people were reacting to what I was doing, and I'm getting booked enough, and I'm working with artists that I'm actually a fan of, and
you're building the team.
Yeah, you're building building the team,
business.
the space, the business, all the things. But it's not the amount. Like I know the number of songs I mixed last year just because it was crazy to think that I can even do that. I never want to hit that number again. Like there's no reason to strive. Like, because if I had that number and then my mentality was I need to do 10, 20 more the next year, I'm going to get even more tired. And then my level of appreciation for life outside of what I do and the identity of who I am with what I do it's not going to create more satisfaction, right? And
Or better work.
Or better. Well, I could argue that because it's not going to maybe make better work, but it could be plateaued at a place where people still accept it and like it, right? So
there's no question you could knock out 20 more or 100 more a year and still
at the same level.
Do good mixes.
I don't want to doubt myself in that aspect of it.
It's not
But there's no level of satisfaction or happiness or a sensation of growth there. And I'd like to find other sensations of growth, other places to grow outside of my career. And I think that in that moment in ASCAP, when you asked me that question, I couldn't have given you that answer because I wasn't where I wanted to be. That was like 3 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not calling you on your answer then.
I know. I don't remember what my answer was then, but I remember thinking, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm going to just answer it another way. I don't know how to answer that because I don't. There's nothing that I would do different in the life that or the journey that I embarked on. And earlier, with you were talking about the investment that was made in you and your career. And I wish I didn't buy all the gear that I bought, but buying all the gear that I bought got me to a certain place where I can sell it. And then, there's a journey along the way that you have to just keep riding. And you meet people along that journey that tell you you're on the right path or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And there's lots of mistakes we make that lead us to a better place.
Well, look, who can we trust, right? That's one of our big questions. Like who are the voices in pro audio that you can rely on?
Yes. So this brings us to
uncorrupted
this
by, commercial incentives.
Okay. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Commercial incentives. Let's talk about what this podcast is and isn't. Who wants to go? Michael.
It's a big commercial.
Honestly, I would like Rory to keep going.
Okay.
For Wendy's.
So yeah. I fucking know you're getting the back channel money from
I know,
Wendy's.
man.
Dude.
This guy.
Yeah,
We're like, you guys didn't want sponsors. I did.
Yeah.
I'm going solo on this.
You went for Wendy's?
Wendy's.
Fucking
They pay.
rogue.
He
Fucking
just
rogue
poured the fucking
sponsorship
podcast out
deals.
for Wendy's.
Isn't Wendy's going to get canceled soon? That's what I heard.
So
No.
we've been working on the idea for this podcast for more than a minute. Wendy's are going to get canceled?
Wendy is getting canceled.
Oh,
Which is
Wendy.
Wendy
What does she
herself?
do?
Yeah.
You don't want to know.
We're not going there. We just got the hand wave from John. Don't do it. Don't talk about it.
Not yet.
He's holding the
Not yet.
the lighter next to the gasoline, and then he pulls it away.
Is that a Molotov cocktail?
Yeah.
Or are you just happy to see me?
All right.
So,
That's
can I just
That's all
say
that's
that
in the
Come on,
as
that's post riots
as
humor.
as
We need
a,
some of that. That's how we heal.
Yeah.
boner jokes.
There were riots up like on the block, man.
I think we
Come
should
on.
vote on a policy where if anyone says we're editing that out or that's edited for real, it stays in.
stays.
It stays in.
It actually,
Oh, yeah.
it actually cements it.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
kidding.
freezes
kidding.
it.
All right, hold on.
Publish
Go
the
on
boner.
your go
Yes,
on.
commercial. So, in the conversations that Spider and I had about what this podcast would be or could be or should be, we talked about how you would sustain over time. We talked about podcasts that we listen to, that we love, that are sponsor supported, and some that are subscription supported, and different models, and what it means, and what the advantages are, and what the constraints are. And I think we sort of landed on a place where we realized pretty quickly that we're not interested in being in self-editing, or if we have an opinion on a piece of gear, for example, we think that a particular brand of converters are no good. We want to be free to say that because that's what we've listened, that's what we've heard, that's our experience.
Because it's how we live.
It's how we live, it's authentic. And if we think you should avoid a certain piece of gear, now if we're sponsored by a converter manufacturer, it makes it difficult. It makes it seem like maybe we're dissing one because we're, the other are supporting us. We want to avoid that. It's not a conflict of interest, but it might seem like one. And we want the freedom to speak, about the whole business and the good and the bad freely. And I think that that's something that we take very seriously. And we've watched other podcasts as they commercialize sort of get corrupted.
Yeah,
And-
well, part of our critique of the industry is that commercial interests have had too much influence over
Yes.
the craft
yes.
and the process and the actually act of doing the work.
Yeah.
So we're creating a sort of space that is free from that influence
yeah.
to explore, the sort of richer side of what it means to be an audio engineer.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more to say on that.
No, it's great.
Um,
We should get all conflicts of interest out in the open then during this.
good idea.
Which
Yeah.
is that, Spider, you work for PMC?
I do. PMC speakers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what my job title is anymore since we're, sort of undergoing a redo
Yes.
behind the scenes. But yeah,
It's worthy of sharing that when we talk about monitoring, we emphasize PMC a lot. And
Yeah.
just,
And-
it's like when Atia talks about the companies that he's invested in.
Sure.
And
Yeah, it's important.
yeah.
And I worked with PMC part-time for 10 years. The PMC team are all close friends and learned a lot, achieved a lot, value that those relationships that I built up, all through the industry, through that company. So I'm very, and used the speakers forever, owned PMCs in Ireland, which is how I met Maurice, who runs PMC USA.
Yes.
So there's a fondness in the family here. John uses PMCs. Michael, when are you going to get your shit together? I have PMCs at home.
Hook it up.
Hook it up. Yeah.
No.
Shout out to Maurice here.
guess-
Hook Michael up.
I should say that I'm also working with PMC.
Yes.
Not for them, but I'm working with them on a marketing project for the next several months. So
Yeah.
I don't own PMCs though, so I guess
Hey
I'm
man,
unbiased.
that will change.
I
I mean,
think-
I was a client for 8 years before.
Yes.
Yes, you should say
Yeah.
that.
I think that's important.
Before I joined the company, and the work that Michael and I are doing in marketing now at PMC is to try to understand the opportunities for win-wins for the community and our company.
Yes.
And trying to, elevate everybody's game
Right.
so that we all grow together. So, I think the relationship is a complementary one to what we're doing here, because this is sort of the philosophical space around the values that Peter Thomas, the founder of PMC, and the company represents. And I don't really see a whole lot of conflict.
No, but
It's
but
just a
I'm an
disclaimer.
enthusiast for the speakers first because of what they can do and what they provide for people. I think it can be profound.
yeah,
It is for me.
What it means in terms of how we'll conduct ourselves in conversations is that when we talk about speakers, we'll keep that in mind. And John mixes records for a living. I master records for a living and do some room acoustics, but primarily master records. So you're not going to hear me shitting on, Mr. or Mrs. mastering engineer X or Y because it's not a good look.
Nope.
But I will talk about stuff I don't like or trends or whatever. I think the same is true of you. We're going to be a little mindful when we're discussing our individual trades. I don't know, is there
I might get a little harsh here and there, but
I think our passion for recording and our enthusiasm is primary to us as human beings, and the companies we work for are in line with that.
Yeah.
It's,
I would hope that we could defend our ideas to anyone that we criticize or they feel we're criticizing. I hope we could,
of course,
that we're prepared to own the ideas. Something that we've talked a lot about as we sort of get into deeper water is the idea of engaging with people we disagree with in a productive way.
seeking opportunities.
So if you're the marketing Jedi for some heartless gear manufacturer and you think it would be a good conversation, then maybe we should have it or maybe not, but we're open to engagement because we're going to be pushing on some sore spots. I think the whole point of the podcast is that it's not business as usual. It's not a celebration of the glory days. It's not music is fucked. It's not music is awesome.
No, it's the hard work of progress.
It's a very complicated time we're in. And I think that a lot of people are having trouble making sense of where we're at. Forget the bigger, sort of macro scale. Even in music, a lot of people are confused about what's happening. I see people or meet people all the time who tell me a story about their music career and the music business that they live in, and they're describing ancient history. They've got hair down to their asses, and they're talking about the sort of primacy of rock music. And I'm like,
I want nothing to do with that. This conversation.
You mean about? Well, I'm lost. Sorry.
About the golden era thinking.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots and lots of stuff to celebrate. There's all the records that we fell in love with and that changed our lives literally. There's lots and lots to celebrate, but this throwback sort of obsession with the past and that this idea that, I just get it all the time from people is that, I was at a party maybe 6 months ago before COVID hit and in a studio, and I walked in the room and I just saw 6 guys of about my age. And I was like, here we go. I didn't even need to guess what they were talking about. And it was, I would have bet my house on the fact that they were talking about how music used to be better. And back in the old days, when people knew how to hit a snare drum, et cetera,
Yeah.
there's nothing more boring to me.
No, it's the worst.
And I think something that's important to us collectively, I think I can speak for us and say that we're passionate about where music can go. We're still hearing amazing artists.
Yeah.
We're still inspired. There's a ton of potential in this crazy selection of gear that we have access to.
But there's rampant insecurity amongst audio engineers.
Of course. Yeah.
People don't know what to charge, how to handle situations. They're not thrown into the deep end by
I
people
think
that are
we're-
senior.
Yes.
I think we're not only excited about where music can go, but where music makers can go as well.
Yes.
And I think that's the sentiment of what we're doing here.
Do we want to be a little ambitious here and talk about sort of our broader goal of helping, maybe modeling some good thought processes or sort of looking at things from, like we described earlier, your technique of sketching to extremes or sort of pushing back on each other, modeling, trying to understand stuff that's maybe, trying to bite off ideas that are maybe bigger instead of just like which plugin is the best, what's the best compressor for snare drum.
I think that's what we do naturally. And I think, when, we're really trying to crack the code of what is this podcast? And it really came back like full circle to us being like, let's just have the conversation we're having prior to us asking, what's this podcast about? Just record it. And we model these behaviors for each other. Everything we've learned has been modeled at some point. And I think we were just watching a show, and one of the characters said that the best advice his teacher ever said was, I don't know. And I think there's things we don't know. You know what I mean?
So much.
And so I think any listener should expect us to not know everything and not hate us for it, but instead feel like that is the perfect opportunity to contribute in whatever way they can.
I know.
We're not here to make proclamations.
Yes.
No, I mean,
we're here to figure it out in real time.
I always think to myself that I'm only certain about my uncertainty.
I know I've been talking a bunch, but I want to jump off that point, which is another kind of core principle, something that we've, something that kept me from having any kind of public platform at all, from a website to an Instagram to doing anything, is this idea that I know I've made a real effort to find really smart people and engage with them, and really smart people, the smartest people in certain fields. And, at AES, there are certain people that I want to find. And if I can get 15 minutes of their time, I learn more than I will in the next 2 months, right? An example is this guy, Bruno Paches, who's a electronics designer. And just what he'll drop in a casual conversation in the hallway will set me on the next year of learning. Just the papers I'll go and find, and amazing dude. So I was very sort of reticent to put myself out there, because I'm surrounded by, luckily, like experts like Thomas at Northward, or Dave Collins, who's a mentor and a friend, who on every level about everything technical knows more than me. And something that we sort of, there's lots of reasons, or lots of ways that I came to sort of realize that I was wrong. But one of the goals of the podcast is that when we get in deep water, when we get into a place we don't understand, is to bring in those voices. So we've kind of jokingly called it phone a friend, but there's stuff we're going to come across where we kind of go, don't know. Let's call the person who does, or and if he doesn't know or she doesn't know, let's go from there. So I think as we're going to ask questions that we're going to come across questions that we don't have the answer to, and that's sort of intentional.
We are only four.
We're not putting ourselves out as experts on everything, or even some things. Where I think where we won't be beat is curiosity.
No, none of that matters, because we're useful to each other.
Yes, yes, and we push each other. I think something we talked about today, Spider, on and I know I'll finish up after this, but something we talked about today on Google was this. I sort of painted this analogy of, like, there was this in the 80s and 90s, music was very emotional and passionate. So you could sing a lyric about, baby, I love you, I'm coming to find you, or whatever, these direct sort of declarations of intent and love. And at some point, and a musicologist or someone who's, better than me could tell you what happened and when it happened. But there was this change where everything became sort of muted and ironic and sort of insecure, vague, and self-deprecating and vague and
non-committal.
Metaphors wrapped in enigmas, whatever. And it was not cool to sing "Baby, I Love You, I Need You." Like on the way over here, I listened to St. Elmo's Fire on the radio. It's fucking crazy, big, dramatic pop song, right? Of course, it's cheesy, but the ultimate diss, in the 90s into the 2000s was this kind of like, that's cheesy, bro. You had to be low key and cool and understated, and I think that the same thing happened for two things, which was kind of ambitious thought, in our space. It sort of became homogenized, and there's not very many people. Like when Spider and I, in our very first conversation about the podcast, I think I text you. Not a first conversation. Early on, I text you some questions, and one of them was, who are the thought leaders in the music space? And it should have been like boom, 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 with all the answers.
Right, like any other field.
It wasn't. It was like Rick Rubin. Now, we're going to have a bunch of guests that we're fascinated and excited to talk to. There are people with great ideas and talent and ability and achievements. But in terms of public thought leaders, so people who are wrestling with difficult questions, there are actually very few. So what we're hoping to do is bring people out of the dark and get them on here, get them involved in the conversation that we're having, right? The other thing that I think has been diminished is the idea of people openly lifting each other up, people working in teams, instead of isolating and competing, that people like the four of us saying, hey guys, I want to consciously, or like we did with a friend of ours recently who's moved to another country, it's like, we need to get on
we need to get on the calendar, bro.
Yeah, once a week, we need to get on the call and we need to move this project forward. The project of me, you, and Spider. And he's in a challenging situation and we want to chop it up once a week and figure out if there's something we can add and help. And I think that's, I'm struggling to find a way to form it, but it's something that's kind of uncool or unfashionable that I think is actually really exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be doing it and want to do more of it,
Completely with you on all of that.
It's forming a band. Like you're making the same commitments to each other. And
this happened today too, where I said all those words and then you just said that and it was better.
Yeah, it's not
you could have just said that and saved me a lot of fucking win. We already practiced this.
Guys, honestly, that was really fun.
Yeah.
I think it's a great note to end on. I think we really expressed a bit of the journey we want to go on together and our values as a team, and where we want this conversation to go. Again, we've been having it for quite some time, and we're trying to continue it with other people and bring them out of the dark, because those thought leaders definitely exist. We just don't know where they are right now. We're going to find them, and can't wait to have them on the podcast and continue the conversation with us. So thanks for doing this.
Yes. Thank you for cooking dinner.
It wasn't really that good this time.
The dinner was good and the wine was a baller.
Ooh, the wine.
Despite the rumors, the dinner was great.
This episode of Conversations was recorded by Rory O'Flattery and mixed by Dylan Seals.